The body was still warm. That was the detail that kept pulling at Ahsoka Tano's attention as Federation security officers surrounded her in the corridor outside Admiral Korath's quarters aboard Neutral Station Sigma-9. Not the blood, not the way Korath's diplomatic robes had pooled around him like ceremonial burial cloth, not the security officer's hands on her arms or the weapons pointed at her face. The body was still warm, which meant she'd arrived minutes after it happened, which meant whoever actually did this was still close. "Don't move," the lead security officer said. His name badge read, Chen, Lieutenant, Station Security. And he was looking at her the way people looked at things they didn't want to touch. "Don't reach for anything, I'm not moving," Ahsoka said carefully. "I want to be very clear that I'm not moving. I'm not reaching for anything, and I would appreciate someone explaining why there are 12 weapons pointed at me when I just found this man's body 30 seconds ago." "Your lightsaber," Chen said. "Show me your lightsaber." Ahsoka reached slowly to her hip. The holster was empty. She hadn't noticed until this exact moment. "It's gone," she said. "It's not gone," Chen replied, and he held up an evidence bag containing a lightsaber hilt that Ahsoka recognized immediately. Same basic design as her own, same length, same grip configuration. It was in the Admiral's chest. "We removed it when we found the body." He paused. 4 minutes before we found you standing over him." Ahsoka stared at the evidence bag. Something was wrong about the hilt. Something she couldn't identify immediately. Something subtle that her brain kept reaching for and not quite grasping. "That's not my lightsaber," she said. Chen looked at her the way people looked at someone who just said something they found genuinely insulting. "Ma'am, we have security footage of you walking toward the Admiral's quarters 22 minutes ago. We have your DNA on the grip. We have a blade plasma signature that our computers matched to your weapon in 0.3 seconds. And we have 12 witnesses who saw you arguing with Admiral Korath during the diplomatic reception 2 hours ago." "I was arguing with him about trade policy," Ahsoka said. "I argue with people about trade policy all the time. I don't kill them." "Ma'am, I'm telling you that lightsaber is not mine." Her voice was completely steady. She'd learned a long time ago that panic was the enemy of survival. And right now, survival required absolute clarity. "I want to contact General Skywalker. I want a forensic analysis of that hilt. And I want someone to review that security footage very carefully, because whoever you saw walking toward this corridor..." She met Chen's eyes. "It wasn't me." Chen reached for his communicator. "Initiating custody transfer. Suspect secured. Contact Federation diplomatic security and..." He paused, looking at something on his wrist display. His expression changed. "Sir, I'm reading a priority transmission. Just hit every open channel in the station. I'm reading it on every ship in the sector. I don't know how something gets sent to every channel simultaneously. That's not..." "What does it say?" another officer asked. Chen read it slowly, his face draining of color as he processed the words. Then he looked at Ahsoka differently than he had 30 seconds ago, not as a murder suspect, as something more dangerous. "I need to call this in," he said quietly. "Put her in containment, full security. Nobody talks to her until command arrives." The message reached the Resolute 17 seconds after it hit Sigma-9's communication network. Anakin was in the middle of a tactical briefing with Admiral Yularen when every console on the bridge lit up simultaneously. He'd never seen that happen before. Not a priority transmission, not an emergency broadcast. Every single channel, every frequency, every communication pathway the Resolute operated on, all carrying the same message at the same moment. Rex read it first. Anakin watched his commander's face and knew before he heard a single word that whatever was in that message was going to change everything. "Sir," Rex said. His voice had that quality it got when he was processing something he needed a moment to accept. "You need to read this." The message was short, clean, translated into 17 languages simultaneously, which meant someone had put serious preparation into its distribution. To all forces operating in the Alpha Quadrant, the beings who call themselves the 501st Legion are not refugees. They are not explorers. They are an advance force sent from another universe to assess the Alpha Quadrant's defenses before a full-scale invasion. Their arrival was deliberate. Their displacement was staged. Every alliance they have formed, every contract they have fulfilled, every act of apparent goodwill has been intelligence gathering in preparation for conquest. They have designated your species as acquisition targets. Admiral Korath has been assassinated by their officer, Ahsoka Tano, to prevent him from sharing evidence of their true mission. Species 11-7-42 must be eliminated before the invasion force they represent arrives. You have been warned. Anakin read it twice. Then he said, very quietly, "Get me Ahsoka." "Sir," Kix said from communications. "I'm not getting a response from her communicator. Station security frequencies are showing elevated activity near the diplomatic quarters. I think..." He stopped. "Sir, I think she's been arrested." "For what?" "The message says she assassinated Admiral Korath." The bridge went silent. Anakin stood up slowly. "Is Korath dead?" "Station security is confirming it on internal channels," Kix replied. "Cause of death listed as lightsaber wound. They're describing the weapon as matching Commander Tano's." Anakin stared at the main viewport, where Sigma 9 station rotated slowly against the star field, looking exactly as peaceful as it had looked an hour ago. "Rex." "Sir." "Who sent that message?" Rex pulled up the transmission analysis, and his expression told Anakin everything before he spoke. "That's the problem, sir. The point of origin is being flagged as..." He stopped, looked at the data again. "It transmitted from inside our fleet, from inside the Resolute." Nobody spoke for a full 4 seconds. "Find me who sent it," Anakin said. "Every communication log, every terminal access, every crew member who was near a transmitter in the last 30 minutes. And get me a shuttle to that station. I want to see Ahsoka right now." "Sir," Yularen said carefully, "if we send a shuttle to that station while they're holding Commander Tano for Korath's murder, we might be seen as attempting." "I'm going to see my Padawan," Anakin said. "Anyone who wants to interpret that as hostile action is welcome to try stopping me." Sigma 9's security commander was a Bolian named Tev, who had the look of someone who'd handled difficult diplomatic situations his entire career and had never handled one quite like this. He met Anakin in the docking bay with 6 security officers and an expression that suggested he was hoping Anakin would make this easy. Anakin was not going to make this easy. "General Skywalker," Tev said, "I appreciate you coming in person. I want to assure you that Commander Tano is being treated with full respect for her..." Where is she? She's in a secure holding facility while we process the evidence. I want to be transparent with you. The evidence we've collected is significant. Security footage, DNA analysis, blade plasma matching. We have to take this seriously. Show me the footage, Anakin said. Tev hesitated. Commander, Anakin said, you have a dead diplomat, a quadrant-wide message claiming my people are invaders, and a political situation that's going to explode in everyone's faces within the next few hours. The fastest way to defuse this is for me to review your evidence and help you understand why it's wrong. So I'm asking you one more time. Show me the footage. They watched it together in the security center. Tev, Anakin, and 2 Federation officers who'd arrived from the nearest starship within minutes of Korath's death, which Anakin noted was impressively fast response time for something that supposedly hadn't been anticipated. The footage showed Ahsoka walking down the corridor toward Korath's quarters. Same height, same Togruta markings, same distinctive Leku and Montrals, same walk. Anakin stopped. Go back, he said. 30 seconds. Play it again. Tev rewound it. Anakin watched the figure walking toward Korath's quarters and felt something cold settle in his chest. Not anger, something more precise than anger. That's not how she walks, he said. Tev blinked. I'm sorry? Ahsoka Tano has walked in front of me for 3 years, Anakin said. I know her gait. I know the way she holds her shoulders. I know the exact rhythm of her stride when she's moving through a neutral corridor versus when she's moving toward a potential threat. That figure, he pointed at the screen, is copying her walk. Whoever that is studied her movements and is imitating them, badly enough that someone who knows her would notice. General, with respect, our biometric analysis confirms. Your biometric analysis is confirming that whoever you're looking at has the right height, weight, and Togruta physiological markers, Anakin said. It doesn't confirm identity, it confirms disguise quality. He turned to face Tev directly. Someone built a Togruta biosynthetic suit, replicated Ahsoka's lightsaber, put her DNA on the grip, walked down this corridor at the exact time they needed, and killed Admiral Korath. Then they left before she arrived, because she did arrive separately, which is why she was found near the body. He paused. And whoever coordinated this had the anonymous message ready to transmit the moment Korath was confirmed dead, before you even had time to conduct preliminary investigation. Tev was quiet for a moment. That's a remarkable theory, he said carefully. It's not a theory, Anakin replied. It's the only explanation that accounts for all the evidence, including the evidence you haven't considered yet. He pulled out a data chip, a scan Kix had run the moment they'd received the crime scene details. The blade plasma signature you matched to Ahsoka's lightsaber. Run it through deeper spectral analysis, not surface frequency matching, deep crystal resonance profiling. Why? Anakin looked at him steadily. Because the lightsaber that killed Korath used a synthetic kyber crystal. Ahsoka's crystals are natural. She bled for them. The resonance profile will be different. Someone built a very good copy of her weapon, but they couldn't replicate what's inside it. Tev took the data chip slowly. Before he could respond, his communicator activated. The voice on the other end was controlled, professional, and carried the weight of someone delivering news they'd been waiting to deliver. Commander Tev, this is Admiral Janeway aboard the USS Venture. I'm transmitting alongside Chancellor Martok of the Klingon Empire and Praetor Neral of the Romulan Star Empire. We are formally requesting joint custody of the 501st Legion pending investigation into Admiral Korath's assassination and the allegations contained in the quadrant-wide transmission. A General Skywalker is to be informed that his fleet is to stand down immediately. Any attempt to withdraw, resist, or communicate with outside forces will be interpreted as confirmation of hostile intent. Tev looked at Anakin. Anakin looked at the security footage still playing on the screen behind him, the figure with Ahsoka's face and the wrong walk, moving toward a dead man's quarters. "Tell the Admiral," Anakin said quietly, "that I'm still reviewing evidence, and that the next transmission she receives from me will include everything she needs to understand that someone in this quadrant is playing all of us." He turned back to the frozen footage, and in the corridor behind the false Ahsoka, barely visible at the edge of the frame, something caught his eye. A shadow, moving in the wrong direction for the station's lighting configuration, belonging to someone who had made sure the camera caught every detail of the frame-up, but hadn't quite managed to erase themselves completely. Somebody made a mistake, Anakin thought, and I'm going to find exactly who. Ahsoka had been in worse situations than a Federation holding cell. She'd been captured by separatists imprisoned on Mandalore, court-martialed by the Republic she'd served since she was 14 years old. She knew what wrongful detention felt like. She knew the particular humiliation of being treated as guilty before anyone bothered checking whether you were. What she didn't know, what was genuinely new, was sitting across from a Federation interrogator who kept looking at her like she was a fascinating specimen rather than a suspect. His name was Counselor Venerable, middle-aged betazoid, with the particular quality that telepaths had of making you feel like they were reading something you hadn't said yet. He hadn't asked a single question in 12 minutes. He'd just been watching her. Ahsoka let him watch. Finally, he said, "You're not afraid." "I'm a Jedi," she replied. "Fear isn't useful right now." "Most people in your situation would at least perform fear," Ven said. "For credibility, the innocent ones especially. They want us to see how upset they are." He tilted his head slightly. "You're just waiting." "I'm waiting for General Skywalker to tear this station apart, looking for the person who actually did this," Ahsoka said, "which is what's happening right now. So yes, I'm waiting." "You have complete confidence in him." "I have complete confidence in him." Ven wrote something down. "Tell me about the argument with Admiral Korath at the reception." "It wasn't an argument," Ahsoka said. "It was a disagreement. Korath believed the Khitomer Accords needed revision to account for new powers entering the quadrant. I believed that revising a 40-year peace treaty, while political tensions are already elevated, was asking for catastrophic misinterpretation from multiple directions. We had that disagreement. We were both professional about it, and then I went to find something to eat, because diplomatic receptions never have adequate food. Multiple witnesses described your tone as hostile. Multiple witnesses probably heard two people disagreeing and decided that since one of them was a species they'd never encountered, hostility was a reasonable assumption. Ahsoka kept her voice level. "Counselor, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to actually think about it, rather than filtering it through whatever profile Federation security built on me in the last 2 hours. How long did it take between Korath's death being confirmed and that quadrant-wide message hitting every channel? Ven paused. Because I've been told it was fast, Ahsoka continued, and I want you to consider what that means. Someone had that message ready, translated into 17 languages, addressed to every military force in the quadrant, complete with our Borg designation number that isn't public knowledge. She leaned forward slightly, sitting in a transmission buffer somewhere, waiting for confirmation that Korath was dead before they hit send. That's not a reaction to a murder. That's a plan that used a murder. Ven was quiet for a moment. That's a sophisticated argument, he said. It's not an argument, Ahsoka replied. It's an observation. The argument is what General Skywalker is making right now to whoever will listen. I'm just sitting here noticing that someone went to extraordinary lengths to put me in this room, which means being in this room is exactly where they want me. And the only reason they'd want me in this room is to keep me away from whatever they're planning to do next. She sat back. So yes, she said, I'm waiting, because the best thing I can do right now is make absolutely certain that the only thing they got right about their plan was getting me arrested. The rest of it, she met his eyes. They're about to discover they got very wrong. Rex found the transmission point in 47 minutes. It wasn't elegant work. It was the kind of grinding, systematic elimination process that clone intelligence training had refined across 3 years of the Clone Wars. Start with the most likely candidates. Eliminate them through verification. Work outward until you find the anomaly that everyone else missed. The transmission had originated from a communications terminal in the Resolute's secondary cargo bay. Mid-deck, low traffic, 3-corridor junctions away from the nearest security camera. Whoever had used it knew the ship's layout well enough to find a blind spot that most of the crew didn't know existed. Rex stood in front of the terminal and thought about what that meant. Not a passenger who'd come aboard recently. Not someone who'd been handed a ship schematic and told to find a gap. Someone who'd been on the Resolute long enough to learn it from the inside. Long enough to walk these corridors until they knew which cameras covered which angles, which maintenance schedules left, which sections unobserved, which crew members worked which shifts. Someone who'd been here for months. He pulled the access logs. The terminal had been used with an authorization code belonging to a civilian researcher, a xenolinguistics specialist named Dr. Perak, who'd joined the fleet's academic staff 4 months ago after the 501st had established their research program in the Badlands. Rex checked Perak's personnel file, checked his duty roster, checked his current location. Then he stood very still for exactly 6 seconds while his mind assembled the picture that was forming. Perak's authorization code had been used, but Perak himself had been logged in medical bay for a routine examination during the exact window when the transmission was sent. The code had been used by someone else, someone who had access to Perak's credentials, or someone who had been in Perak's presence long enough to lift them. Rex transmitted one encrypted message to Anakin. Found the terminal. Not who you think. Come back before you talk to Janeway. Then he went to find Dr. Perak. Perak was where his medical bay log said he'd be. finishing up a standard physical in examination room 3, looking perfectly ordinary in the way that people who were innocent of everything looked ordinary because they had nothing to perform. "Commander Rex," Perrick said, surprised. "I wasn't expecting—" 14 weeks ago, Rex said, sitting down across from him without being invited to. "Did you share your communications authorization code with anyone?" Perrick blinked. "What?" "Your credentials for accessing shipboard communication terminals. Did you share them with anyone? Write them down anywhere? Enter them in the presence of someone who might have been watching your input sequence?" "No, Perrick stopped. His expression shifted in the way that expressions shifted when a memory surfaced that the person hadn't been thinking about. "Wait, I don't think this is relevant, but let me decide what's relevant. 4 months ago, just after I came aboard, I was having trouble accessing the research network. The system kept rejecting my credentials, and I was trying to file a priority report on the dimensional resonance data. One of the engineering technicians helped me. She ran a diagnostic on my access profile, fixed the authentication error. She would have had to interface directly with my credential sequence to do that." Rex kept his voice completely neutral. "Which technician?" "Lieutenant Sola," Perrick said. "She's been aboard since you all arrived, I think. Very competent. She knew the system better than anyone I'd worked with. I just assumed she was standard fleet personnel." Rex stood up. "Thank you, Doctor," he said. "Don't discuss this conversation with anyone." He was already moving before Perrick could respond. Lieutenant Sola's personnel file was impeccable. That was the first problem. In Rex's experience, genuinely impeccable service records belonged to people who were either extraordinary soldiers or people who had constructed their backgrounds very carefully. The absence of any negative notation, any performance variance, any incident report across 14 months of active fleet service wasn't a sign of competence. It was a sign of professional fabrication. The second problem was her current location. Sola was listed as on duty in the secondary engineering section, which was 3 decks below the communications terminal in the cargo bay, and which happened to be adjacent to the ventilation network that connected to the ship's primary data core. Rex assembled a 4-man security team, without explaining why, transmitted a second message to Anakin that said only secondary engineering now, and moved. They found Sola's workstation unoccupied. Her tools were laid out with the particular precision of someone who'd been interrupted mid-task rather than finished normally. A diagnostic panel was open on the junction she'd been working on. Rex looked at the junction, looked at what was behind it. "Sir," one of his troopers said quietly, "that's a data uplink conduit." "I know what it is." "Someone installed something in it. Recently. The trooper ran a scanner. Within the last 6 hours. Rex reached into the conduit and pulled out a device the size of his thumb. Matte black, no markings, connected to the data conduit through an interface that combined Republic engineering principles and Federation component design in a way that suggested someone with deep technical knowledge of both systems. A hybrid device, built by someone who understood Republic technology from the inside and understood Federation technology from experience. Rex turned it over in his hand, feeling the weight of what it implied. "Find Sola," he told his team. "Every deck, every compartment. She doesn't leave this ship." He looked at the device. "And get me a full sweep of every junction, every conduit, every panel she had access to in the last 2 weeks. I want to know exactly what this device was doing and exactly what it was sending to whom." His communicator activated. Anakin's voice. "Rex, I'm back aboard. What did you find?" Rex looked at the device in his hand, looked at the open conduit, looked at the workstation with its perfectly arranged tools and its missing technician. "Sir," he said, "I found the transmission point. I found how they accessed Perak's credentials, and I found a surveillance device installed in our data core that's been running for an unknown period." He paused. "But I haven't found Sola yet, and I'm starting to think that the fact she's not here right now isn't because she ran. It's because whatever she was doing in this conduit, she just finished it." Silence on the channel. Then Anakin, "What does the device do?" Rex ran the scanner over it again. The results made something cold move through his chest that had nothing to do with the temperature in the engineering section. "It's a transmission activator," Rex said. "Passive collection, active burst transmission. It's been recording data from our primary systems. Everything. Navigation, communications, tactical databases, personnel files, dimensional research logs." He looked at the readings again to make sure he was interpreting correctly. "Sir, it transmitted its entire collected archive 18 minutes ago, right around the time Korath was murdered." "To where?" Rex checked the transmission vector. The destination wasn't a ship. It wasn't a station. It was a set of coordinates in deep space, the kind of coordinates that served as relay points for communications that weren't meant to be traced back to their final recipients. But there was one data point that the relay coordinates contained, one fragment of identification that the person who'd built this device had either forgotten to strip out or hadn't realized would survive the routing. A ship registry prefix, Republic Military. Rex stared at it for a long time. Then he said, "Sir, you need to come down here, and I need you to be ready for something that doesn't make sense yet." "Rex, someone from our universe is in this quadrant," Rex said. "Not from our fleet, not someone who came through the rift with us. Someone who came through separately. Someone who's been here long enough to embed an agent on our ship, plan an assassination, and trigger a quadrant-wide military response against us." He took a breath. "Whoever framed Ahsoka, they're not from here. They're from home." The silence that followed lasted 4 full seconds. When Anakin spoke again, his voice had the quality it got right before something irreversible happened. "Lock down the ship," he said. "Nobody on or off. Find Sola and Rex." A pause. "Start a full crew audit. Everyone who came aboard after our initial arrival. Everyone whose background we accepted on trust. Everyone who might have been positioned here before we even knew we were going to be here." Rex was already moving. "Sir, there's one more thing." "What?" The device was also monitoring our communications with the outside. Every transmission we've made, every alliance we've discussed, every tactical assessment, every vulnerability assessment, every conversation about how we'd defend ourselves if the major powers moved against us." He stopped walking. "Whoever built it knows everything we know about our own defenses. They know our weaknesses, and they just sent all of it to someone who now knows exactly how to destroy us." Outside the ship's viewports, the stars were as peaceful as they'd ever been. Somewhere in that peaceful dark, the quadrant was already mobilizing, and the person who'd started it all was still aboard the Resolute. The conference room that Federation security had arranged on Sigma 9 was designed for diplomatic neutrality. Clean lines, balanced lighting, a table sized for equals rather than adversaries. Nobody in the room felt like equals. Anakin sat on one side with Rex and Commander Burnham. Across from him, Admiral Janeway occupied the center seat with the particular stillness of someone conserving energy for what they expected to be a long fight. To her left, Klingon General Martok, one eye, one expression, zero patience for anything he considered political theater. To her right, Romulan Praetor Neral, whose face had the quality of expensive porcelain, beautiful, cold, and designed to reveal nothing. 3 civilizations. Combined fleet strength of approximately 400 warships within response range. They all looking at Anakin like he was a problem they hadn't yet decided how to solve. Anakin looked back at them like they were people who didn't yet understand the situation they were actually in. General Skywalker, Janeway began, we appreciate you agreeing to this meeting. Given the circumstances, let's skip the appreciation, Anakin said. You have 400 ships positioned around 14. The appreciation isn't mutual, and pretending otherwise wastes time we don't have. I'd rather spend the next hour showing you why you're wrong than performing diplomacy neither of us believes in right now. Martok made a sound that might have been approval. Janeway's expression didn't change. The evidence against Commander Tano is substantial. The evidence against Commander Tano was constructed by someone who had access to substantial resources and significant preparation time, Anakin replied. I want to walk you through exactly why that's true, but first, he slid a data chip across the table toward Janeway. I want you to run a deep crystal resonance analysis on the lightsaber recovered from Korath's body. Not surface plasma matching. Deep spectral profiling of the kyber crystal at its core. Can you do that in the next 20 minutes? Janeway looked at the chip. Why? Because Ahsoka Tano's lightsaber crystals are natural. She bled for them during her Jedi trials. The resonance profile of a crystal bonded to a Force user through that process is completely distinct from a synthetic replica. If that weapon belongs to her, the analysis will confirm it. If it doesn't, Anakin held her gaze. Then you'll have definitive proof that someone built a copy specifically to frame her. Neral spoke for the first time. And if we run this analysis and it confirms authenticity? Then I'm wrong, Anakin said, and we have a different conversation. Janeway nodded to an aide who took the chip and left. 20 minutes. The room settled into the particular tension of people who were committed to positions they might have to revise. Martok leaned forward. The message, the one that named your people as invaders, it transmitted from inside your fleet. It transmitted using a stolen authorization code through a terminal in a low-traffic section of our ship, Rex said. We identified the transmission point within 47 minutes. The code belonged to a civilian researcher who was in medical bay during the transmission window. Someone lifted his credentials and used them without his knowledge. Someone aboard your ship, Neral observed. Someone who came aboard our ship after our initial arrival, Rex replied. Someone with detailed knowledge of Republic technology and our fleet's internal layout. We're conducting a full crew audit right now. We'll have a name within hours. Hours, Martok repeated, with the tone of someone who found hours insufficient. Admiral Korath is dead. The Khitomer Accords are functionally suspended. Federation and Klingon fleet commanders are awaiting authorization to engage your fleet. You have hours. Then let's use them well, Anakin said. Instead of executing a military action that whoever framed Ahsoka very specifically designed to provoke. That landed. He watched it land on all three of them, watched Janeway's expression tighten with recognition, watched Martok process the tactical logic, watched Neral file it somewhere behind those careful eyes. Explain, Janeway said. Anakin placed a holographic projector on the table. The image resolved into a timeline, clean, precise, assembled in the 40 minutes between his return to the Resolute and this meeting. Korath is killed at 1847 station time, Anakin said. The quadrant-wide message hits every channel at 1849. 2 minutes later, the message was pre-written, pre-translated into 17 languages. He preloaded into a transmission system capable of simultaneous delivery across every open channel in this sector. He advanced the timeline. For context, from the moment Korath's body was discovered to the moment Federation security confirmed cause of death was 11 minutes. The message hit before you had cause of death confirmation, before you had any investigation, before you had anything except a body and a Togruta standing near it. Someone wanted you moving against us before you had time to think, Rex said. Because if you thought about it, you'd ask the same questions we're asking. Janeway was very still. The transmission preparation time alone represents days of work minimum, Anakin confirmed. This wasn't reactive, this was planned. Korath's death was the trigger for a response that was already loaded and waiting. The response was specifically designed to unite every major power in this quadrant against the 501st simultaneously. He looked at all three of them. I want you to ask yourselves one question. In the 6 months we've been operating in this quadrant, what have we actually done to justify the invasion narrative in that message? Silence. We fought the Borg, Rex said. We defended Federation colonies. We fulfilled contracts with the Klingon Empire. We provided intelligence to the Romulans about dimensional threats. He paused. We haven't conducted a single offensive action against any Alpha Quadrant power. Not one. If we were an advance invasion force, we've been extraordinarily bad at it. Neral's lips moved in what might have been the ghost of a smile. The Tal Shiar reached a similar conclusion. He said, 14 ships is not an invasion fleet. It is, however, exactly the right size to be a convenient target. Praetor, Janeway said, with the tone of someone who hadn't expected an ally in that direction. I'm not defending them, Neral said. I'm observing that the logic of the situation doesn't support the narrative we were handed. The question I find more interesting, he turned those cold eyes to Anakin, is who in this quadrant has sufficient resources to frame a Jedi, trigger a political crisis, and manufacture evidence against an alien military force, all within a coordinated 6-hour window. Nobody in this quadrant, Anakin said. The room went still. The surveillance device we recovered from our data core, Rex said, transmitted its archive to relay coordinates that contained a Republic military registry prefix. Not Federation, not Klingon, Republic. Someone from our universe is operating in this quadrant, Someone who came through a dimensional rift separately from us has been here long enough to embed an agent aboard our ship and plan this entire operation, and has now succeeded in triggering exactly the military response they wanted. From our universe, Janeway said slowly, which means they have knowledge of our capabilities, our weaknesses, our tactical doctrines, and our relationships with every power in this quadrant, Anakin said. They know us better than you do, and they used that knowledge to construct a frame that would turn every ally we have against us simultaneously. He looked at all three of them steadily. Someone from my universe wants us dead, not captured, not detained, dead. Man, they've been willing to assassinate a neutral diplomat and destabilize 40 years of Alpha Quadrant peace to make it happen. The door opened. The aide returned with a data slate, which she placed in front of Janeway without speaking. Janeway read it. Her expression went through 3 distinct phases in approximately 4 seconds: assessment, recognition, and something that looked almost like anger at herself for having been close to making a catastrophic mistake. She slid the data slate to Martok. Martok read it. His jaw tightened. He slid it to Neral. Neral read it and placed it on the table face up. The crystal resonance analysis. Clean data, clear conclusion, no ambiguity in the findings. Sample. Weapon recovered from scene crystal composition. Synthetic kyber. A laboratory-grown resonance profile. Unbound. No force attunement detected. Comparison to Commander Tano's registered weapon profile. Non-match conclusion. Weapon is a replica, not Commander Tano's lightsaber. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Martok said, with the voice of a warrior who just recalibrated an enemy assessment, someone built a fake Jedi weapon. A very good one, Anakin said. Good enough to fool initial plasma matching. Not good enough to fool deep crystal analysis, because you can replicate the shape and the frequency, but you can't replicate what happens when a Jedi bleeds for a crystal. He paused. The person who built it knew enough about Jedi weapons to construct a near-perfect replica. That's not general knowledge. That's specific knowledge. Republic knowledge. Janeway looked at him with an expression that had shifted from adversarial to something more complicated. What do you need from us? Time, Anakin said. Stand your fleets down from active engagement posture. Not permanently. I understand you have political pressure that makes complete de-escalation difficult right now, but enough space for us to find who's doing this before they execute whatever Phase 2 of this plan looks like. He leaned forward. Because Korath's death was Phase 1, the frame was Phase 2. The military mobilization is Phase 3, and I promise you, there's a Phase 4. And whoever is running this operation, they are counting on us fighting each other while they execute it. Martok looked at Janeway. Janeway looked at Neral. Something passed between the three of them. The particular communication of people who'd spent careers reading rooms and had just collectively read this one the same way. We stand down active engagement orders, Janeway said. Containment posture only. Your fleet does not move. In exchange, you share every piece of evidence you collect in real time. No filtering, no withholding. Everything you know, we know. Agreed, Anakin said. And General... Janeway's voice shifted slightly, carrying something that wasn't quite warning and wasn't quite request. When you find who did this, you bring them to us. Not Republic justice. Not your definition of accountability. Ours. Korath was killed in our quadrant. That matters. Anakin thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. "When we find them," he said, "you'll have them. You have my word." He stood, and Rex stood with him. Burnham was already moving toward the door. They were halfway out when Martok spoke. "Skywalker." Anakin turned. Martok was looking at him with that single eye, and the expression on his face was the one Klingon warriors reserved for people they'd decided were worth respecting. "Find them fast," Martok said. "I can hold my commanders for 48 hours before political pressure makes standing down impossible. After that..." He spread his hands with the pragmatism of someone describing weather. "I cannot promise what happens." 48 hours, Anakin said. He walked out of the conference room and into the corridor, where the calm of Sigma 9's neutral architecture felt suddenly very thin against the scale of what was moving outside. Rex fell into step beside him. "Sir," Rex said quietly, "while you were in there, I got a transmission from Kix." "Sola?" "Still not found." Rex paused. "But Kix cross-referenced her personnel file against our crew manifest going back to day 1. She's not listed as original fleet crew. She came aboard at the neutral station Praxis 7 resupply stop 4 months ago. Which means she was positioned there in advance," Anakin said, "waiting for us to stop. Which means someone knew our resupply schedule. Which means someone's been tracking us since before we established our resupply patterns. Since close to when we arrived," Rex said. They walked in silence for a moment. "There's one more thing," Rex said. "The crew audit flagged something. 6 weeks after we arrived in this quadrant, there was an unscheduled docking event at 0300 ship time. A small vessel. Life sign readings consistent with one humanoid. The docking log was deleted, but the power consumption record wasn't." He handed Anakin a data chip. "Someone came aboard the Resolute in the middle of the night, 6 weeks after we arrived, and we never knew about it." Anakin took the chip, held it. "Rex," he said, "when you find Sola, don't bring her to a holding cell." "Sir?" "Bring her to me," Anakin said. "Directly to me, before anyone else talks to her, before Federation security requests access, before anyone on this ship knows we have her." He met Rex's eyes. "Because whoever sent her knows everything about how we operate, and the one thing we cannot afford right now is to follow a predictable pattern." Rex nodded once. "Understood." Anakin looked down at the data chip in his hand. Someone from his universe. Was someone who knew the 501st well enough to anticipate them, well enough to build a fake Ahsoka, well enough to trigger a quadrant-wide military response with 6 hours of coordinated execution. Someone who'd been in this quadrant almost as long as they had. Someone who'd been watching them from the beginning. The question that was going to keep him awake tonight wasn't who it was. It was why they'd waited this long. Rex found Sola in the one place nobody had thought to look, not because it was hidden, because it was obvious. The Resolute's observation lounge on Deck 7. Open to any crew member, large viewport facing open space, comfortable seating arranged for people who needed somewhere to think. The kind of place you went when you weren't hiding because hiding would make you look like you were hiding. She was sitting in the far chair with a cup of something hot, watching the stars. Rex stood in the doorway for 3 seconds, taking inventory. No visible weapons, relaxed posture, the body language of someone who had decided that whatever was coming and that tensing up about it. wouldn't change the trajectory. He walked across the lounge and sat down in the chair beside her. She didn't look at him. "Commander Rex," she said, "I wondered which of you would find me first." "I had a head start," Rex replied. "I've been looking for you since I found the device in the conduit." "How long did that take?" 47 minutes to find the transmission terminal, another 30 to trace it back to Perak's credentials, another 20 to trace those back to you." He paused. "You're good. The device installation was clean. If we hadn't been actively looking for something exactly like it, we probably wouldn't have found it for weeks." "Months," Sola said. "Realistically, your security sweeps have predictable patterns. We'll fix that. I know." She took a sip from her cup. "I want you to know something before you take me to wherever you're taking me." "I'm listening." "I didn't know what the device was going to be used for," Sola said. "I was told it was a passive intelligence collector, standard monitoring. I was told it would be used to assess whether the 500 first represented a security threat to ongoing operations in this quadrant." She looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were steady, not the eyes of someone performing innocence, the eyes of someone who'd made a calculation and was living with it. "I was not told it would be used to frame your commander for murder and trigger a military response that gets people killed." Rex looked at her for a long moment. "Who told you to install it?" he said. She smiled, and it was the saddest smile Rex had seen in a long time. "That's the question that's going to make everything more complicated." "Tell me anyway." "I will," she said. "But I need you to understand something first. Because when I tell you, your first instinct is going to be to not believe me, and then your second instinct is going to be to believe me, and to handle it wrong. And handling it wrong ends everyone." Rex leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms. "I'm listening." Sola turned to face him fully now, and Rex saw something in her expression that he hadn't expected. Not guilt exactly, but the particular weight of someone who'd been carrying knowledge that was too heavy for one person. "I've been in this quadrant for 9 months," she said. "I arrived 2 months before you did. I came through a different rift, smaller, unstable, opened by equipment I still don't fully understand. I was sent here specifically. My mission was to locate the 500 first when you arrived, embed with your fleet, and monitor your activities." "Sent by who?" Rex said. By someone who knew you were coming," Sola said, "before you even left, before the Battle of Raxus Secundus, before the separatist weapon activated and pulled you through the rift." She held his gaze. "Someone who knew the dimensional event was going to happen because they caused it." Rex felt something cold settle in his chest. "The separatists," he said. "Count Dooku." "Not Dooku," Sola said. "Dooku was an instrument, a very sophisticated one, but still an instrument." She paused. "The person who sent me has been operating in this quadrant for almost a year, building infrastructure, placing assets, preparing for your arrival with the kind of patience that suggests they had very specific plans for what to do once you got here." She looked back out the viewport. "Ew, and those plans didn't include you surviving long enough to become comfortable?" "Who sent you?" Rex said again, harder this time. Sola looked at him steadily. "Commander Rex," she said quietly. "The person who sent me has been aboard this ship since the 3rd week of your arrival in this quadrant. Not as an agent I recruited, not as someone I placed." She paused. "As someone who placed me." Anakin was in the middle of reviewing the dimensional rift data when Rex's transmission came through. "Secondary Observation Lounge, Deck 7. I have Sola. Sir, before you come down here, I need you to be ready." Anakin was moving before Rex finished the sentence. He covered the 4 decks between the command center and the observation lounge in 3 minutes, which was faster than the turbo lifts should have allowed, and which was a function of the Force suggesting that the next few minutes were going to require him to be present rather than in transit. Sola looked up when he came in. She assessed him with the quick professional evaluation of someone who'd spent time studying his file. "General Skywalker," she said, "you move like the footage suggested." "We can discuss my movement patterns later," Anakin said. He pulled a chair and sat directly across from her, close enough that there was no ambiguity about how serious this conversation was. "Rex says you have information about who sent you, about who's been aboard this ship." "I do." "Tell me." Sola looked at Rex, then back at Anakin. Whatever she saw in Anakin's expression seemed to settle something for her, some internal calculation about whether this was the right moment to commit to the truth. "Do you remember," she said carefully, "when you first arrived in this quadrant and made contact with Federation forces, there was a period of approximately 3 weeks before you established formal relationships with any major powers. During that period, you rescued the crew of a damaged Federation research vessel." Anakin nodded slowly. The crew included 7 Federation scientists and 1 passenger who identified herself as a civilian specialist evacuating from a Klingon border station, Sola said. "She integrated smoothly into your fleet's civilian research program. She had the right credentials, the right background, the right skill set. She was helpful, professional, and completely unremarkable." Anakin was very still. "Her name in your personnel files," Sola continued, "is Dr. Marin Vial. She's currently assigned to the Dimensional Research Team, Secondary Analysis Division." A pause. "That's not her real name, and she's not from this universe." The silence in the observation lounge was the kind that had weight. Rex said, "She's been aboard since week 3. "She's been running me since week 4, Sola said. "I was already embedded when she made contact. She redirected my mission, changed my objectives, told me the device installation was her operation, not whoever originally sent me." She looked at Anakin with those steady eyes. "I didn't know she was going to use it to frame Commander Tano. I want to be clear about that. I was told the data collection was for assessment purposes. When I realized what was actually happening, when I saw the Korath assassination being reported and understood what the transmission from our ship had been for..." She paused. "That's why I stopped running." "You stopped running," Rex said. "I'm sitting here waiting to be found," Sola said. "Does that not tell you something?" Anakin stood up. Rex looked at him. "Sir." "I know," Anakin said quietly. "How do you want to handle this?" The question was simple. The answer wasn't, because handling it meant confronting someone who'd been integrated into their dimensional research program for 9 months, someone who had access to every piece of classified information the 500 first possessed, someone who, if Sola was right, had orchestrated Korath's assassination, framed Ahsoka, and triggered a quadrant-wide military response against them with the particular efficiency of someone who'd had a year to plan it. "Carefully," Anakin said. "If she knows we're coming, she runs. If she runs, we lose her, and we lose whatever she's been building here for the past year." He thought for 3 seconds. "She doesn't know Sola came to us. She's expecting Sola to be discovered. That's why Sola's credentials were used on the transmission terminal rather than concealed completely. She wanted Sola found, wanted us chasing Sola while she executed Phase 4. "What is Phase 4? Rex asked. Sola said, "I don't know exactly, but I know it involves the dimensional research. What she's been building toward. It's not just destroying the 500 first. It's accessing the dimensional rift technology. She wants to go back." A pause. "Or she wants something from back there to come here." Anakin felt the Force hum with quiet warning. "What does she actually want?" Anakin asked. Sola took a breath. "She told me once," Sola said slowly, "that the problem with the 501st surviving in this quadrant wasn't the 501st itself. It was what your survival proved. That if you could come through a rift accidentally and survive, then a rift could be opened deliberately. And if a rift could be opened deliberately," she met Anakin's eyes, "then whatever's been building in your universe could come through it." "What's been building in our universe?" Rex asked. Sola looked at him like the answer was something she'd been hoping she wouldn't have to say out loud. "She calls it the final contingency," Sola said. "I don't know exactly what that means, but she said that if the 501st successfully opened a return rift, the dimensional resonance would act as a beacon, and the beacon would bring something through that makes the Borg look like a preliminary test." She paused. "She's not trying to destroy the 501st because she hates you. She's trying to destroy you because she believes your survival in this quadrant is going to get everyone in it killed." The observation lounge was very quiet. Outside the viewport, the stars were peaceful and indifferent. "Was she right?" Rex said finally, looking at Anakin. Anakin thought about the dimensional rift they'd come through, the void stalker that had followed the resonance, the Borg that had been attracted by the dimensional signatures, the feeling in the Force persistent and quiet, that the barrier between universes was thinner than it had been when they arrived. He thought about what they'd brought with them when they came home. "I don't know," he said. It was honest. "But I know that whoever this woman is, she's been making decisions for an entire quadrant without their knowledge or consent. She assassinated a neutral diplomat. She framed Ahsoka. She triggered a war." His voice was level and cold. "Even if she's right about the danger, she doesn't get to decide the cost everyone else pays for her solution." He looked at Sola. "Take me to Marin Vile," he said. "General, if she sees you coming." "She won't," Anakin said, "because you're going to walk in first, normally, like nothing happened. And you're going to ask her a simple question." He paused. "Ask her if the frame worked. She'll think you're checking in on the operation, and while she's answering," he touched his lightsaber, "I'll already be in the room." The walk to the dimensional research section took 6 minutes. 6 minutes in which Anakin moved through maintenance corridors that didn't appear on the standard ship schematic, because the 501st had added them after arriving in this universe, and they weren't in any database that an outside agent would have accessed. 6 minutes in which Rex coordinated a quiet security perimeter around the research section's exits using encrypted clone comm frequencies that predated the Resolute's arrival in this quadrant. 6 minutes in which Anakin thought about someone sitting in his ship for 9 months, breathing his air, eating food from his galley, sleeping in quarters his crew maintained, while planning the systematic destruction of everything and everyone he was responsible for. He reached the maintenance hatch adjacent to the secondary analysis lab and stopped, reached out through the force, felt the minds inside the research section, distracted, focused, doing the work of people who believed they were building towards something meaningful, and one mind that felt different, not dark side, not light side, something altogether more unsettling, a mind that had made peace with terrible choices, that had organized its ethics around an objective so comprehensive that everything else became permissible. The mind of someone who was absolutely certain they were right. Anakin knew that feeling. He'd felt it in himself sometimes, on the worst days. In the moments when the Clone Wars made the cost of everything seem worth whatever it took to end it, he'd learned to be afraid of that feeling. "Ready?" he said quietly into his comlink. Across the corridor, the research section door opened. He heard Sola's voice. "Dr. Viel, do you have a minute? I need to ask you something." A pause. Then a voice Anakin had heard dozens of times in briefings, in passing, in the background of meetings, a voice that had always registered as unremarkable, because the person it belonged to had been very careful to be unremarkable. "Of course," said Dr. Marin Viel. "What do you need?" "I need to know," Sola said carefully, "if the frame worked." A silence of exactly 2 seconds. Then Marin Viel said, in a completely different voice, not the mild research scientist, but something harder and more tired, "You were found faster than I expected." "General Skywalker is thorough," Sola said. "Yes," Marin said, "he is." Anakin came through the maintenance hatch. Marin Viel was already facing the panel he'd come through, which meant she'd felt him in the Force, or had the room wired for entry detection, which amounted to the same thing. She was younger than he'd expected, mid-30s, the kind of face that was easy to overlook in a crowd. And in her eyes, looking at him across the research lab, with all its screens and data cores and the quiet hum of dimensional calculations, recognition. Not the recognition of someone seeing a target, the recognition of someone seeing a person they'd spent a year trying to understand. "General Skywalker," she said. Her voice was completely calm. "I've been expecting this conversation. I just expected to have it on my terms." "Nobody gets everything on their terms," Anakin said. She almost smiled. "No, I suppose they don't." His lightsaber was in his hand, but not ignited. Rex appeared in the doorway behind her, blocking the exit. Sola stepped to the side, out of the potential engagement space, with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd assessed the geometry of the room and made sensible choices. "You're going to want answers," Marin said. "I want a lot of things," Anakin replied. "Right now I want you to tell me who you actually are, who sent you, and what the final contingency is." Marin looked at him for a long moment. Then she sat down in the nearest chair. Not the movement of someone surrendering, the movement of someone who'd been standing for a very long time and had finally decided the standing wasn't necessary anymore. "My name," she said, "is actually Marin Viel." That part was true. Everything else, She looked around the research lab at the dimensional calculations on every screen. Is more complicated. Start with who sent you. She looked at him steadily. Nobody sent me, she said. I came because I chose to, because I'd spent 18 months in your universe after coming through a rift of my own, watching what was building there, understanding what would happen if the dimensional barrier was further weakened by the 501st returning home. She paused, and because the only way to stop it was to prevent you from being here long enough to open a rift home. By destroying us, Rex said flatly. By making your survival here politically impossible, Marin said. Yes, I know how that sounds. I know what I took from you. Her eyes moved to Anakin. From Commander Tano specifically, that wasn't... She stopped. There wasn't a clean way to do what needed doing. There's never a clean way when you decide everyone else's choices for them, Anakin said. Something moved across her face. Not guilt exactly. The older, deeper thing that guilt eventually became when you'd been carrying it long enough. The final contingency, Anakin said. Tell me what it is. Marin looked at him, and for the first time since he'd entered the room, something in her expression shifted from the careful control she'd been maintaining. Something that looked almost like fear. General Skywalker, she said quietly. Yeah, you came through a dimensional rift 9 months ago. You've been generating dimensional energy signatures ever since. Research experiments, micro rifts, the resonance from your own presence as Force users in a universe that wasn't designed for the Force. She looked at the calculations on the screens around them, and every signature you've generated has been visible across dimensional barriers to things that monitor those barriers. She paused. How long did it take the Void Stalker to find you after you arrived? Anakin said nothing. And the Borg detected your dimensional research almost immediately, Marin continued, because they monitor for exactly those signatures. She leaned forward. General, the Void Stalker and the Borg aren't the only things that monitor dimensional signatures. They're just the fastest. The thing that's been building in your universe, the thing that's been using the Sith artifacts, using the Clone Wars itself as cover for what it's actually doing, it doesn't move as fast as a Void Stalker, but it's been aware of you since you arrived. She paused for one precise, devastating beat. And 4 months ago, I detected the first signs that it had found a way to follow you. The research lab was very quiet. Outside, through the viewport, the Alpha Quadrant's stars burned on with peaceful indifference. What is it? Anakin said. Marin Vial looked at him with the eyes of someone who'd been carrying the answer to that question alone for a very long time. I don't know what to call it, she said. In your universe, it doesn't have a name yet. But I've been watching what it does to dimensions it passes through. She gestured at the screens around them, at the calculations that suddenly looked less like research and more like documentation of a catastrophe in progress. And General, there is no version of this that ends well for either universe, unless we stop what I spent 9 months trying to stop through the wrong method. She looked at him directly. I framed your commander, she said. I triggered a war. I did everything I could think of to make you impossible to sustain in this quadrant, because I believed that was the only way to prevent you from opening a rift that would let it in. Her voice was steady, but her hands, Anakin noticed, were very still in the particular way that hands were still when their owner was working hard to keep them that way. I was wrong about the method. I was not wrong about the threat. She paused. And now we have perhaps 72 hours before it becomes visible enough that I can show you exactly what I've been afraid of. Anakin stared at her for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, "How long?" She understood the question immediately. Not how long until the threat arrived. How long had she been carrying this alone? How long had she known and said nothing and done the wrong things for the right reasons? 18 months, she said, since before you left your universe. The silence had weight. Rex looked at Anakin. Anakin looked at Marin Vael. And Marin Vael looked at the calculations on her screens. Calculations she'd been running not to help the 501 Saint find their way home, but to track the approach of something she'd spent 18 months being terrified of. And for the first time since she'd sat down, her careful composure cracked slightly at the edges. "I need your help," she said. "I know I don't have the right to ask for it. But General, I need your help, because whatever I did to you, whatever I took from you, it was trying to prevent something so much worse that I accepted becoming the villain in your story, if it meant preventing everyone in both universes from having no story left at all." Anakin didn't move for a long moment. The Force whispered something he didn't entirely want to hear, that she was telling the truth, that the threat was real, and that the next decision he made would define not just the 501st's survival in the Alpha Quadrant, but whether two universes had a future at all. Anakin took Marin Vael to the bridge, not to the brig, not to an interrogation room, not anywhere that felt like punishment or containment, or the kind of controlled environment that security protocols recommended for individuals who just confessed to framing a Jedi and triggering an interstellar war. To the bridge. Because whatever Marin Vael had done, whatever her methods had cost, the screens she'd been running in that research lab were showing something that couldn't wait for proper procedural handling. And because Anakin had spent 9 months in this universe, learning that sometimes the right call and the safe call were different calls, and choosing between them was the whole job. Rex followed without comment. Sola followed because nobody told her not to. Marin sat at an auxiliary station and pulled up her data without being asked, with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd been waiting to show this to someone for a very long time. 43 days ago, she said, I detected the first dimensional resonance spike that didn't match any known source. Not your research experiments, not residual energy from your arrival rift. Something external. She overlaid 2 datasets on the main screen. This is the resonance profile from when the 500 first arrived. See the signature, jagged, asymmetric, the kind of pattern you get from an uncontrolled breach. She pointed to the second dataset. This is what I detected 43 days ago. Smooth, controlled, purposeful. She looked at Anakin. Something is opening rifts deliberately from the other side. From our universe, Anakin said. From your universe, but not by your people. She advanced the data. The signature matches Force energy, specifically dark side Force energy in concentrations that suggest either a very powerful Sith artifact or, she paused, or something that's been feeding on the war. Your universe has been fighting for 3 years. something that's grown strong enough on the conflict itself to start manipulating dimensional barriers. Kix spoke from his station. "Sir, if something is opening rifts from the other side, we'd see the resonance spikes in our monitoring network," Ahsoka said. Everyone turned. Ahsoka Tano stood in the bridge doorway, slightly crumpled from hours in a Federation holding cell, one hand still carrying the faint marks of restraint processing, and looking at Marin Viel with the particular expression she reserved for people she hadn't decided about yet. "You're out," Anakin said. "Janeway released me 40 minutes ago after the crystal analysis came back." Ahsoka walked in and stopped in front of Marin. "You built a copy of my lightsaber." "Yes," Marin said. "You put my DNA on it." "Yes." "You killed a man and made it look like I did it." "Yes." Ahsoka studied her for 3 seconds. "Why are you still alive?" "Because General Skywalker made a judgment call," Marin said. "He makes a lot of those." Ahsoka glanced at Anakin, then back to Marin. "They don't always work out." "Snips," Anakin said quietly. "I'm not going to do anything," Ahsoka said. "I just want her to understand that I'm aware of exactly what she did, and that my patience for her explanation is limited, and that she should make it count." She pulled up a chair and sat down. "Show me the data." Marin showed them everything. 43 days of resonance monitoring, 17 dimensional spikes of increasing magnitude, the gradual pattern emerging from the data that suggested not random energy fluctuation but systematic probing, something testing the barrier between universes, the way you tested a wall before you decided where to put a door. "Each spike is stronger than the last," Marin said. "The interval between them is decreasing. The first spike was 11 days after the previous one. The most recent two were separated by 31 hours. She highlighted the progression. "At current acceleration, the next spike will be within 18 hours, and based on the energy curve," she ran the projection, "the one after that will be sufficient to open a traversable rift." "How traversable?" Rex said. "Large enough for a capital ship," Marin said. "Maybe larger." "What comes through?" Anakin asked. "I don't know exactly," Marin said. "I know what I observed in your universe before I left. There was something building in the outer rim, something that was using the Clone Wars as cover, taking advantage of the fact that every Republic sensor array was pointed at separatist activity. Every Jedi was deployed on a front somewhere. Every intelligence resource was exhausted from 3 years of constant conflict." She paused. "It moved through systems and left them changed. Not destroyed, changed. The people were still there. The infrastructure was intact. But something fundamental was different about those systems afterward, like the personality of an entire world had been subtly altered." "Dark side corruption," Plo Koon said from the doorway. He'd arrived quietly in the way that Keldor Jedi Masters sometimes did, present before you realized they were coming. "I encountered something similar in the Outer Rim before the Battle of Raxus Secundus. I filed a report with the Council. They categorized it as residual Sith influence from ancient sites." "It's not residual," Marin said. "It's active, and it's been feeding." She looked at Plo Koon steadily. "Master Jedi, how much stronger does the dark side feel in this universe compared to what you're used to?" Plo Koon was quiet for a moment. "It feels quieter here. The Force itself feels different, less present. Because you're in a universe where it hasn't been manipulated for 3 years, Marin said. Your universe has been having something done to it, gradually, systematically. And the Clone Wars provided the perfect conditions. Millions of deaths generating dark side energy. Jedi stretched too thin to notice changes at the margins. Sith actively suppressing investigation into anything they didn't want found. She looked around the bridge. Whatever is building there, it's been feeding on your war, and it's getting ready to move somewhere with more room. The bridge was very quiet. Then Ahsoka said, "You came here to stop us from going home, because if we opened a rift, it would follow us through." "Yes," Marin said, "but it's opening its own rift anyway." A pause. "Yes," Marin said. "So your entire plan," Ahsoka said, with the particular tone of someone working through logic, "they wished led somewhere else. Your assassination, your frame, your political catastrophe, none of it actually prevents what you were afraid of. It just would have destroyed us in the process of failing to stop it." Marin said nothing, because there was nothing to say. "How did you get here?" Rex asked. Not accusatory, the practical question that connected everything else. "I was a Republic intelligence analyst," Marin said. "I specialized in Sith artifact tracking after the Battle of Geonosis. 14 months ago, I found something in the Outer Rim that the Council's report had classified as residual influence. I investigated more deeply than I was supposed to. What I found..." She stopped for a moment. "What I found suggested that the thing building in your universe had been aware of Sith dimensional research for decades, had been waiting for someone to successfully breach the dimensional barrier, not to follow them through, but to use the breach as a template, to learn from it how to do it themselves. And then I came through a rift by accident," Anakin said. "And then you came through a rift by accident," Marin confirmed. "And within weeks I detected the first evidence that something in the Outer Rim had noticed, had started studying the resonance signature, had begun its own experiments with dimensional manipulation." She looked at him. "I had access to prototype dimensional research at the Republic Intelligence Division. I used it to follow you before it could. I thought if I could prevent you from being here, prevent you from running dimensional experiments that would strengthen the resonance signature, I could buy enough time for the thing building in your universe to lose interest in this particular quadrant. Instead, you made everything worse," Rex said. "Instead," Marin said carefully, "the situation developed in ways I didn't predict, which is what happens when one person tries to manage a problem that requires more than one person." A pause. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for help. Because I spent 18 months trying to solve this alone, and I've failed completely. And the window between now and catastrophe is now measured in hours rather than months." Anakin stood at the viewport looking at the stars. The Force was doing something he'd been trying to articulate to himself for weeks, a low, persistent pressure that felt like the universe leaning slightly in a wrong direction, like something vast was pressing against a barrier from the other side, and the barrier was beginning to give. He'd been attributing it to dimensional research, to the micro rifts, to the residual energy of their arrival. He turned around. "What do you need?" he said. Marin looked at him with something that might have been relief if she'd allowed herself to feel it. "I need your dimensional research data, all of it. The calculations Dr. Cardell's team developed, the resonance mapping, the rift stabilization models. She paused. And I need to send a transmission to the other side, to someone in your universe who can confirm what I'm tracking and who has the authority to mobilize Republic resources against something that isn't wearing a separatist flag. You want to contact the Republic, Ahsoka said. I want to contact the Jedi Council, Marin said, and I want them to know that whatever is building in the Outer Rim. She looked at the screens with their dimensional resonance data. It's almost ready, and the 501st being here isn't the problem. The 501st being here might be the only advantage either universe has left. Anakin looked at Rex. Rex said, Sir, we still have the problem of 400 ships outside who think we assassinated a diplomat. I know, Anakin said. Janeway's standing down active engagement, but Martok gave us 48 hours. That was... Rex checked his chrono. 17 hours ago. I know. And Sola is technically still an intelligence asset who embedded herself on our ship without authorization. Rex. Sir. I'm aware of every problem we have, Anakin said. I'm also aware that in approximately 18 hours, something is going to open a rift into this quadrant from our universe, and that whatever comes through it is going to make 400 hostile warships look like a manageable situation. He looked at Marin. You said you needed to send a transmission to the Jedi Council. Can you do that without the resonance spike being detectable by whatever's building the rift? If I use your dimensional research data to mask the transmission in background resonance, yes, Marin said. It would look like a micro-rift experiment rather than a deliberate communication. Do it, Anakin said. Aye, General, Plo Koon said carefully, contacting the Council without authorization. We're 9 months into being stranded in a different universe, Master, Anakin said. I think we've moved past worrying about authorization. He looked at Marin steadily. But I want everything on the table first. Everything you know about what's coming. Every data point, every projection, every piece of analysis you've been sitting on for 18 months. You were working alone because you decided you had to. You don't have to anymore. He paused. But if you're going to sit at my table, you tell me everything. No more decisions you make for everyone else without their knowledge. Clear? Marin met his gaze. Clear, she said. Then start talking, Anakin said. Because we have about 16 hours to prepare for something that's been building for 3 years. Explain to Janeway and Martok why they need to stop pointing their guns at us and start pointing them at a dimensional breach and figure out how to fight an enemy that we don't have a name for yet. He paused. In my experience, those are exactly the kinds of problems the 501st is best at solving. Ahsoka said very quietly, We're going to need a bigger plan. We're going to need a better one, Rex corrected. Both, Anakin said. The Resolute's bridge settled into the particular focused energy of people who had accepted impossible circumstances and decided to start solving them. Outside, the Alpha Quadrant's stars burned on, and somewhere in the space between universes, something vast and patient and very, very hungry felt the barrier beginning to thin and started to push. The transmission to the Jedi Council took 4 hours to construct, not because the technology was difficult, because Marin's masking protocol required weaving the signal through 17 separate dimensional resonance frequencies simultaneously, creating a pattern that looked indistinguishable from the background noise of a natural micro-rift activity. One wrong harmonic and whatever was monitoring dimensional signatures from the other side would detect a deliberate communication rather than ambient energy fluctuation. Marin worked. Anakin watched. Neither spoke much. Around them, the Resolute operated with the controlled intensity of a ship that knew something was coming and had decided to be ready rather than afraid. Clone troopers ran equipment checks that didn't need running. Engineers tested systems that were already at optimal. Rex walked the decks at 2-hour intervals, doing the thing he did when he was processing difficult information. Moving, observing, cataloging. At 0340 ship time, with 11 hours remaining before the projected rift opening, Marin looked up from her console. "It's ready," she said. "But General, before we send it, there's something you need to know about who we're sending it to." "The Jedi Council," Anakin said. "Specifically Master Windu," Marin said. "I've been in contact with him before I came here, when I first discovered what was building in the Outer Rim." She paused. "He believed me. He investigated. And then 3 weeks later, he told me the Council had reviewed my findings and determined the threat was overstated. That the energy signatures I'd identified were consistent with ancient Sith site activity and not indicative of active manipulation." Anakin was quiet for a moment. "You think someone got to him?" "I think someone got to the Council's information pipeline," Marin said carefully. "Not necessarily Windu himself, but whatever I submitted as evidence, it was reviewed, categorized, and buried with remarkable efficiency, which is either very good Council administration," she looked at him, "or someone in the Republic intelligence apparatus with access to Council communications decided that investigation wasn't convenient." "Palpatine," Anakin said. Marin blinked. "You know about Palpatine?" "We had a conversation before we came back through the rift," Anakin said. "He confirmed he's Sith. He escaped before the Council could detain him." He paused. "He's currently operating somewhere in Republic space with full knowledge that we know his identity and the motivation to make sure that knowledge doesn't spread." Marin stared at him. "You confronted Darth Sidious," she said slowly, "and survived." "Barely," Rex said from across the bridge without looking up. "That changes things significantly," Marin said, "because if Palpatine knows you're aware of his identity, and if whatever is building in the Outer Rim is connected to Sith dimensional research, then the timeline I've been projecting may be accelerated. He may have signaled it deliberately, used your return to the Republic universe as notification that the barrier had been successfully crossed, which is exactly the kind of confirmation something waiting on the other side would need to begin final approach." "You're saying Palpatine might be working with whatever this is," Ahsoka said. "I'm saying Palpatine has spent decades orchestrating conditions that feed dark side energy," Marin said. "The Clone Wars, billions of deaths, an entire galaxy experiencing prolonged conflict. Whether he knows exactly what he's been feeding, or whether he simply created conditions that something else exploited, the result is the same." She looked at the dimensional resonance data on her screens. "Something has been getting very strong in your universe for a very long time. And Palpatine either built it, enabled it, or is running from it. None of those options are good." "Send the transmission," Anakin said. "To Windu." "To Yoda," Anakin said. "No, Windu's brilliant, but he runs things through the Council's formal structure. Yoda makes decisions when decisions need making." He paused. "And if Palpatine's been compromising Council communications, Yoda is the one person in the Order who'd have already noticed something was wrong with the information pipeline. He's been suspicious of everything for years. I used to think that was just how old Jedi Masters got. Now I think he's been sensing something none of us had the context to name." Marin nodded and adjusted the targeting of the transmission. "There's one more thing," she said. She didn't look up from her console. "The thing building in your universe. I've been calling it the final contingency because that's what my analysis suggested. Something that exists as an option of last resort for a type of consciousness I don't have adequate language to describe. Something that exists in the spaces between dimensions, the way the Void Stalker existed in the spaces between stars, but orders of magnitude larger, orders of magnitude older." She paused. "I've been trying to understand what it actually wants, and the closest I've been able to get, based on the dimensional resonance patterns it leaves behind in systems it's passed through, is that it doesn't want anything in the way we want things. It doesn't have goals. It has a function." "What function?" Rex said. Marin finally looked up. "Reset," she said. The word sat in the air. "Define that," Anakin said quietly. "So when a dimensional barrier has been sufficiently weakened, when the resonance between universes has been destabilized past a certain threshold, the dimensional ecosystem becomes what you might call compromised, contaminated. The boundaries that should exist between realities start to break down." She gestured at her screens. "This thing that's coming, I believe it functions as a corrective mechanism, something that exists outside both universes and moves in when the dimensional ecosystem is damaged beyond natural recovery. It doesn't destroy for conquest. It doesn't assimilate like the Borg. It resets." She paused. "Which means it removes whatever caused the contamination." "Which is us," Ahsoka said. "Which is anything that crossed the dimensional barrier," Marin said. "The 501st. Myself. Sola. Any technology or biological matter that doesn't belong in this universe." She took a breath. "But a reset at the scale this thing operates. It doesn't make careful distinctions between what crossed the barrier and what was already here when the crossing happened. The resonance damage extends throughout the affected area. The reset addresses the resonance damage." "It would destroy both universes," Plo Koon said. "It would restore the dimensional barrier by eliminating the sources of contamination," Marin said, "including everything that was contaminated by proximity to those sources." She paused. "I don't think it's malevolent. I think it's like an immune response. The immune system doesn't hate the infection. It just removes it." "That's not actually more comforting," Rex said. "No," Marin agreed. "It's not." Anakin walked to the viewport, looked at the stars. The Force was doing that thing again. The low, persistent pressure from the direction of dimensional space, like something very large breathing against a thin wall. "Send the transmission," he said. "And then I want everything you have on how this thing moves, how it detects dimensional contamination, and whether it can be reasoned with." "I don't believe it can be reasoned with," Marin said. I've met a lot of things people said couldn't be reasoned with, Anakin replied. I like to verify that assessment personally. He turned around. While you're sending the transmission, Rex, I want to talk. They used the captain's private observation alcove off the main bridge, a small space with a viewport and 2 chairs that Anakin had used for difficult conversations since they'd arrived in this universe. Rex settled into the second chair with the particular posture of a soldier who'd learned to be physically still when processing things he wasn't certain how to feel about. 48 hours, Rex said. We're down to 31. I know. Martok's commanders are going to start pushing for engagement authorization around hour 40, Rex said. Even if Martok personally holds the line, there are 3 house commanders in that fleet who've been looking for an excuse to test Republic weapons since the Battle of Tezra Expanse. They're not going to wait peacefully while we deal with a dimensional crisis they don't know about yet. Which is why we tell them, Anakin said. Rex looked at him steadily. All of it? Janeway, Martok, Naral, full briefing. Everything Marin showed us. He paused. They need to understand what's coming through that rift. Not because I trust them completely. I trust Janeway as far as institutional interest allows. I trust Martok as far as warrior honor allows. And I trust Neral exactly as far as I can throw a Romulan warbird. But right now, their institutional interests and their warrior honor and their political calculations all point the same direction. Because whatever comes through that rift doesn't care about the Khitomer Accords or the Klingon Empire or the Romulan Star Empire. It cares about dimensional contamination. And this entire quadrant qualifies. They'll want to control the response, Rex said. The moment we bring them into the briefing, they'll want to put their people in charge of defending against this thing. We become assets in their operation rather than independent commanders of ours. Maybe, Anakin said, but Rex, we have 14 ships. Whatever comes through that rift, 14 ships isn't enough. We need their fleets whether we like the political complications or not. Rex was quiet for a moment. There's something else, he said. His voice had shifted slightly, the tone he used when he was about to say something he'd been sitting on, not because he'd forgotten, but because he'd been deciding whether to say it. Anakin recognized that tone. He'd been waiting for it since Rex's first transmission from the cargo bay. How long? Anakin said. Rex looked at him. Since I found the device in the conduit, Rex said. When I traced the transmission back through Perek's credentials and found Sola's access pattern, there was something else in the access log, a secondary user. Someone who had accessed the same communications terminal 6 weeks before Sola used it. Different credentials, different access pattern, but the same terminal. He paused. The secondary user's credentials belonged to someone on the Dimensional Research Team, someone who'd been on the Resolute since our 2nd month in this quadrant. Not Marin, Anakin said. No, Rex said. Not Marin. Marin came aboard in week 3. This access was in week 8, before Marin arrived. He paused again. Sir, I've been sitting on this because I ran the credentials 4 times and got the same result. And I needed to be absolutely certain before I told you, because the person these credentials belong to is someone we trust completely. Someone who has been with us since the beginning. Someone whose loyalty I have never had any reason to question, and whose access to our dimensional research is total, and whose knowledge of this ship's communication systems is comprehensive. He met Anakin's eyes. Someone who, if they've been compromised or placed, means that everything we think we know about our own operational security is wrong. Anakin didn't speak. "The credentials belong to Commander Burnham," Rex said. The name dropped into the silence of the observation alcove and stayed there. Michael Burnham, former Starfleet officer, the person who defected from the Federation to warn the 500 first about Section 31's betrayal, the person whose ethical stand had made her one of the most trusted non-Republic individuals in the fleet, the person who had been present for every major strategic discussion, every tactical briefing, every conversation about dimensional research for the past 9 months. Anakin looked at Rex for a long time. "Did she know about Marin?" he asked. "I don't know," Rex said. "The terminal access was 6 weeks before Marin arrived. It could have been innocent, wrong place, wrong time. Someone used her credentials the same way they used Parax. It could have been something else entirely." He paused. Or it could mean that Marin wasn't the only person operating in this fleet with objectives she hadn't disclosed. "Where is Burnham now?" "Communications Center," Rex said. "She's been coordinating our transmissions to Janeway since the Sigma-9 meeting. She has access to every message we've sent in the last 17 hours. He paused. "Including the content of our discussion with Marin." Anakin stood up. "Don't confront her yet," Anakin said. "Don't change how we interact with her. Don't do anything that signals we're looking at her differently than we were this morning." He paused at the alcove doorway, but Rex, quietly, carefully, without Burnham knowing, "I want everything she's transmitted in the last 9 months audited. Every outgoing message, every received communication, every access log that has her credentials attached." He paused. "And I want to know if there are any transmission vectors in her access history that lead anywhere near a Republic military registry prefix." Rex stood. "And if there are?" Anakin looked out at the stars for a moment. "Then we have a much bigger problem than I thought," he said. "Because it means the person who briefed us on Section 31, the person who helped us navigate Federation politics, the person who sat in on every sensitive conversation we've had for 9 months, he paused, has been telling someone everything." He walked back onto the bridge. Burnham was at the communications console. She looked up when he came in, offered the small professional nod that had become their standard acknowledgement. Completely normal, completely composed. Anakin nodded back, and in the Force, underneath the normal surface of things, he reached out very carefully and felt her emotional state, the way he'd learned to do across 3 years of the Clone Wars, not invasively, just reading the ambient resonance that living beings projected whether they meant to or not. What he felt wasn't guilt. It wasn't duplicity. It was fear. Quiet, deep, controlled fear, the kind that had been present for a long time and had been managed so carefully that it had become a constant background note rather than an active state. Burnham was afraid of something, had been afraid for a while, and was working very hard to make sure nobody noticed. Anakin walked to his command chair and sat down. 11 hours, 1 diplomatic crisis, 1 framed Jedi, 1 confessed saboteur with genuine intelligence, 1 potential second agent in his closest circle and something from between universes pressing against the dimensional barrier with 11 hours left on the clock. "Marin," he said without turning around, "how's the transmission coming?" 15 minutes, Marin said from her station. "Good," Anakin said. He looked at the stars. Burnham looked at her console. Neither of them said what they were actually thinking, and the dimensional resonance monitors at the edge of the Resolute sensor range registered a spike, small, almost imperceptible, easily attributable to background activity, except it was 4 hours earlier than projected, and it was getting stronger. The resonance spike lasted 9 seconds. Then it stopped, cleanly, completely like a sound cut off rather than faded, which was wrong. Natural dimensional fluctuations tapered. They didn't stop. Things that stopped that cleanly were being controlled by something that understood precision. "Marin," Anakin said. "I saw it," she said. Her voice had the quality of someone whose worst projection had just been confirmed ahead of schedule. "It's not background noise. That was deliberate. Something tested the barrier, measured the resistance, and withdrew. It's calculating." "Calculating what?" Kix asked. "The minimum energy required to breach," she said. "It doesn't want to waste force. It wants to open a rift exactly as large as it needs, exactly as fast as it can sustain." She pulled up the spike's resonance profile. "General, this is 4 hours earlier than my projection, which means either my energy curve was wrong or it accelerated when it detected our transmission preparation," Plo Koon said quietly. Everyone went still. "The masking protocol," Anakin said, "was designed to look like a micro-rift experiment," Marin said, "to something monitoring dimensional signatures from the other side. It would have read as exactly what I intended. A research experiment." She paused. "But if it's sophisticated enough to distinguish a masked transmission from genuine background noise, if it detected the directionality of the signal." "It knows we're aware of it," Ahsoka said. "And it knows we're trying to coordinate a response," Marin finished. She was already running new calculations, her hands moving with the focused urgency of someone recalibrating around a collapsed assumption. If it knows we're coordinating, it won't wait for optimal conditions. It'll breach when it has sufficient energy rather than when it has perfect energy. She looked at her screens. "Which means my 11-hour window just became something between 4 and 7 hours. I can't narrow it further than that." "Send the transmission now," Anakin said. "Whatever masking we have, use it. We can't wait for perfect protocol." "Already sending," Marin said. Anakin turned to the bridge. "Rex, Janeway, Martok, Neral. Full briefing, all 3 simultaneously. I want them on screen in 10 minutes. "Sir, simultaneous 3-way briefing with adversarial powers who are currently in containment posture around our fleet. That's diplomatically." "It's necessary," Anakin said. "Tell them I have information that supersedes the current political situation. If they don't want to hear it, they can explain why to whatever comes through that rift." Rex moved. Anakin looked at Burnham. She was watching her console, tracking communication flows, doing her job with the quiet efficiency she'd demonstrated for 9 months. He made the decision, not because he was certain, because certainty was a luxury he didn't have, and waiting for it would cost him the window for action. "Commander Burnham," he said. She looked up. "I need you off the communications console," he said. "Take secondary tactical. Kix will cover comms for the briefing." A fraction of a second, the kind of pause that most people wouldn't notice. "Of course," she said, and moved. Anakin watched her cross the bridge and take the secondary tactical station with complete professionalism. Felt through the Force the slight uptick in that deep background fear. Controlled immediately, smoothed over, gone. Something had happened to Michael Burnham. He didn't know what yet, but whatever it was, it had been happening for months, and she'd been managing it alone with the particular stubbornness of someone who decided that her situation was her problem to solve. He recognized that. He'd done it himself for years. Janeway, Martok, and Neral appeared on the main screen simultaneously. 3 faces, 3 expressions, with 3 calculations running in parallel about why the 501st's general had requested emergency joint briefing instead of sleeping during what should have been the quietest window before a diplomatic storm. "General Skywalker," Janeway said. "This had better be significant." "I wouldn't have pulled all 3 of you off your ships at 0400 if it weren't," Anakin said. He didn't preface it, didn't build to it. "We have a dimensional breach incoming, somewhere between 4 and 7 hours. Something is opening a rift from the Republic universe into this quadrant. It is not the 501st. It is not Republic military forces. It is not anything I have adequate language to fully describe. But I have someone aboard who's been tracking it for 18 months, and whose data I've reviewed personally, and which I believe completely." Silence from all 3 screens, then Martok. "Show me." Anakin stepped aside. Marin moved to stand where the cameras would capture her clearly. She showed them everything. The resonance spikes, the acceleration curve, the dimensional modeling, the 9-second test pulse from 40 minutes ago, the recalculated timeline. She presented it with the clean precision of someone who had rehearsed this briefing in her head for a year and a half while hoping she'd never have to give it. When she finished, Neral spoke first. "The Tal Shiar has detected anomalous dimensional readings in this sector over the past 6 weeks, he said carefully. We categorized them as residual energy from the 501st's research activities. Our analysts recommended monitoring rather than investigation." He paused. "I will be having a significant conversation with those analysts. The Federation has similar readings in our long-range sensor logs," Janeway said. Her voice had the quality of someone reassessing 6 weeks of data very quickly. "We also attributed them to 501st research." She looked at Marin directly. "You're certain this isn't a natural phenomenon?" "The 9-second test pulse 40 minutes ago was not natural," Marin said. "Natural dimensional fluctuations don't have clean termination points. Whatever is on the other side of that barrier shut it off deliberately when it had the measurement it needed." "And what does it want?" Neral said. "It doesn't want anything in the conventional sense," Marin said. "It functions as a corrective mechanism for dimensional contamination. The 501st's presence in this universe has weakened the barrier between realities. This thing responds to that weakness the way an immune system responds to infection. It removes the contamination." "Remove meaning," Martok said. "Remove meaning, eliminate," Marin said. "The contamination and everything sufficiently proximate to it." Martok looked at the dimensional resonance data for 3 seconds. "How many ships do you need?" he said. Janeway, "General, what's the tactical situation? What are we dealing with in terms of scale?" "We don't know exactly," Anakin said. "We know it's large. We know conventional weapons affected the Void Stalker, a smaller dimensional entity, but required coordinated fire and force-guided targeting to achieve meaningful damage. We know it's intelligent enough to calculate breach optimization and respond to detected preparations by accelerating its timeline." He paused. "We know it's been building in strength for 3 years by feeding on the energy of a galactic war, and we know that the last time we faced something like it, we had one advantage it couldn't account for." "The Force," Janeway said. "The Force," Anakin confirmed. Neral leaned forward. "You're telling me that the defense of this quadrant depends on the metaphysical abilities of 4 individuals?" "I'm telling you the Force provides targeting and damage capabilities that conventional weapons can't match against entities that exist partially outside normal physics," Anakin said. "It's not the only weapon, but it's the one this thing hasn't encountered before. And surprise is worth more than firepower when firepower hasn't been working." "What do you need from us?" Janeway said. "Every ship in your respective fleets within 6 hours response time," Anakin said. "Full weapons free on the breach coordinates the moment something comes through. No hesitation, no political consultation, no waiting for confirmation of hostile intent. If it comes through that rift, it's hostile, not because it chose to be, but because its function makes it so." He paused. "And I need you to stand your fleets down from containment posture around the Resolute immediately. I can't run a defensive operation against a dimensional entity while 400 ships are pointed at my hull." Janeway looked at Martok. Martok looked at Neral. Something passed between 3 people who had spent careers reading rooms and had just collectively read this one the same way they'd read the conference room on Sigma 9. "Containment order lifted," Janeway said. "I'll have the 3rd Fleet repositioned to defensive coordinates within 90 minutes. House de Gore contributes 40 battle cruisers," Martok said, "and I will personally command from the Negvar." He paused. "This is the kind of enemy that deserves a general's attention. The Tal Shiar will provide 12 warbirds and full intelligence support," Neral said. "And General Skywalker," those cold eyes moved to Anakin with something that was almost respect. "Whatever your agent did to precipitate this political crisis, the crisis is suspended pending resolution of the dimensional threat. We will revisit it afterward." "Understood," Anakin said, "and thank you, all of you." He ended the transmission. The bridge settled into the particular silence of a ship, recalibrating from defensive posture to something more purposeful. Anakin turned around. Sola was standing near the back of the bridge, largely forgotten in the intensity of the last 20 minutes. She caught his eye and gave a small nod that said, "This is the right call." He looked at Marin. "Oh, how's the transmission to Yoda?" "Sent 20 minutes ago," she said. "No response yet. The round trip through the masking protocol takes approximately 40 minutes." She paused. "If we get a response at all. I don't know if what I sent read as a legitimate Jedi Council communication or as another test pulse. There was no time to fully verify the masking before sending." "We'll know in 20 minutes, Anakin said. He walked to the command chair. sat down, thought for 3 seconds about what Rex had told him in the observation alcove, about Burnham's credentials in the transmission terminal log from week 8, about the fear he'd felt in her emotional signature 20 minutes ago, about the fact that she was now at secondary tactical with access to everything except the communications console he'd moved her from, and about the fact that he'd moved her from it, which she would have noticed, which meant she knew he suspected something, which meant that whatever she'd been managing alone for 9 months, she was now managing it with the additional knowledge that Anakin Skywalker was paying attention. He didn't look at her. "Burnham," he said, "sir. Secondary tactical reads clean. All boards green," she said. "Fleet repositioning is already underway. Janeway's ships are moving to the coordinates Marin identified." "Good," he said. 30 seconds of silence. "Sir," Burnham said. "Yes." "The transmission terminal in secondary cargo bay," she said. "The one Rex found. I know you ran the access logs." Her voice was completely level. "I know my credentials showed up in week 8. I know what that looks like." Anakin said nothing. "I didn't send anything from that terminal," she said. "I was there because I detected anomalous network activity in the junction adjacent to it, and I was investigating without flagging it through official channels because I wasn't certain what I was looking at yet." She paused. "Someone was already monitoring your systems before Marin arrived, before Sola arrived. Someone had installed a passive collector that predated both of them." Another pause. "When I found it, I pulled it. I didn't report it because I didn't know who had placed it, and I didn't know who on this ship might be connected to whoever placed it. I was trying to protect you without knowing if protecting you meant trusting you with information that might get you killed." Anakin turned his chair slowly, looked at her. "You found a device," he said. 4 months before Rex found the second one," she said. "Same type, different location, Section 6, Tertiary Data Junction." She reached into her uniform and placed something on the console beside her, a device the size of his thumb, matte black. No markings, Republic military construction with Federation component integration. "I've been carrying it because I didn't know where to safely store it, and I didn't want it back in any of your systems." Anakin looked at the device, looked at Burnham. In the Force, her fear was still there, but different now. The fear of someone who just made themselves vulnerable and was waiting to see if the vulnerability would be used against them. "Why didn't you tell me?" Anakin said. "Because when I found it, I didn't know if you knew about it," she said. "I didn't know if it was your operation. I'd been Starfleet for 15 years. I know what institutional intelligence operations look like. I know what it looks like when a commanding officer runs surveillance on their own people because they don't fully trust their own people." She met his eyes. "I wasn't certain enough to accuse you. I wasn't certain enough to ignore it. So I pulled it and I waited and I kept watching." "For 9 months, Anakin said. "For 9 months, she confirmed. Silence. Then Anakin said, "That's either very loyal or very stupid." "Probably both," Burnham said. "Sir." He held her gaze for a moment. The Force was quiet. Not the absence of danger, the presence of truth. The particular stillness that settled when someone had just said exactly what was real without calculating how it would be received. "Put it with the other device," he said. "We'll have the research team analyze both for differences in construction timeline and identify if there are additional units we haven't found." He turned back to the main viewport. "And Burnham, "Sir, next time you find something like that on my ship," he said, "you tell me. Regardless of whether you're certain, regardless of who you think might be involved, you tell me and we figure it out together." He paused. "We don't do this alone. None of us. That's been the lesson of this entire 9 months, and I keep having to relearn it in new ways." Burnham said nothing for a moment. Then, "Understood, sir." The communications console lit up. Kix sat forward sharply. "Sir, incoming transmission. Dimensional masking frequency. It's..." He stopped, looked at the readings again. "Sir, it's from the Republic universe. Someone received our message." Anakin stood up. "Put it through." The transmission was degraded, filtered through 17 resonance frequencies, compressed, translated, carrying the artifacts of dimensional transit. The voice was thin and distorted, but unmistakable. "General Skywalker, message received. Your information is consistent with what we have been observing from this side. The Council has been aware of dimensional anomalies in the Outer Rim for 6 weeks. We were unable to identify source until your transmission provided directional data, a pause in which dimensional static crackled like something alive. We have confirmed what your analyst identified as the final contingency. We have designation for it in ancient Sith texts that were recovered from Malachor 5 years ago and classified immediately at highest security levels. The texts call it the Ardanu. It is described as..." The transmission, fragmented, came back. "Older than the Sith, older than the Republic, older than the Force as we understand it. The texts describe it as a function of dimensional physics rather than a being with intention. It responds to contamination by..." More fragmentation. Then Yoda's voice, very clear for exactly 4 words, "Do not let it through." Then silence. The transmission was gone. The bridge held its collective breath for 3 seconds. "Ardanu," Marin said quietly. "That's what it's called." "You didn't know the name?" Ahsoka asked. "I had descriptions," Marin said. "Effects, resonance profiles. I never found the name." She looked at the dead transmission frequency. "If it's in Sith texts from Malachor, that means the Sith encountered it. Which means the Sith knew what would happen if they started manipulating dimensional barriers. And they did it anyway." She paused. "Which means either they found a way to survive its reset function, or they didn't," Plo Koon said quietly. The dimensional resonance monitors at the edge of the sensor range spiked again. Longer this time. 14 seconds, stronger, closer, then clean termination. 3 hours, Marin said, reading the data. "Maybe less. It has what it needs." She looked up. "General, it's coming." Anakin looked at his crew, looked at the Allied fleets repositioning outside. 200 ships moving into defensive coordinates around a point in space that didn't look like anything yet. Looked at the Force, which was doing something he'd never felt it do before, pressing from every direction simultaneously, like standing at the center of a compass, while all 4 directions tried to be north. "All hands," he said, and his voice went out across every speaker on every ship in the Allied fleet through the command frequency they'd established. "This is General Anakin Skywalker. In the next few hours, something is going to try to come through a dimensional rift into this quadrant. It doesn't have ambition, it doesn't have anger, it doesn't want to conquer or assimilate or negotiate. It simply has a function. And its function is the erasure of everything that isn't supposed to be here. He paused. The 501st Legion has been here for 9 months. In that time, we've fought the Borg, survived political betrayal, been framed for murder, and triggered an interstellar crisis through the simple act of existing in a universe that didn't expect us. We've made enemies of every major power in this quadrant, and we've made them allies again inside 48 hours. He looked at the stars. What I'm asking now is simpler than any of that. I'm asking every ship in this fleet, Republic, Federation, Klingon, Romulan, to stand between that rift and every living thing in this quadrant, not because we were asked to, not because it's our war, but because it is now and we're here, and the 501st does not look away from things that need to be fought. A pause. Prepare for dimensional breach. May the Force be with all of us. He sat down. Rex said quietly, "Good speech." "I mean every word," Anakin said. "I know," Rex said. "That's why it's good." The resonance monitors spiked again. This time, they didn't stop. The rift opened like a wound. Not the swirling vortex of the 501st's dimensional portal that had been controlled, mathematical, a precisely engineered breach that opened and closed according to calculated parameters. This was different. This was space-time tearing along a seam that shouldn't exist. Reality splitting along a fracture line that had been pressed from the other side until something gave. It started as a point of absolute darkness approximately 700,000 kilometers off the Resolute's port bow. Then the darkness expanded. "Breach forming," Kix reported, his voice tight. "Dimensional resonance off the scale. Sir, the readings are, our sensors can't quantify this. Every measurement I'm trying to take is returning values that shouldn't be physically possible." "Don't rely on sensors," Anakin said. "Use your eyes. You use your training. What do you actually see?" What they actually saw was a circle of nothing, not black like space, not dark like shadow, but genuinely absent, a region where light that entered did not come back, that grew from the diameter of a shuttlecraft to the diameter of a starship to the diameter of something that made the Resolute look like a fighter craft. 2 kilometers across, Rex said, still expanding. 3, Marin corrected quietly, and the resonance decay at the edges suggests it's stabilizing at approximately 4, maybe 4.5. "What comes through something 4 kilometers across?" Ahsoka said. Nobody answered because they were all looking at the breach. Through the Force, Anakin felt it before anything became visible, a presence that existed differently from anything the Force had ever shown him. Not a consciousness he could read, not a will he could sense, something more like a natural process that the Force perceived the way it perceived gravity or entropy, not as a being but as a function, a mechanism, something that was because the universe required it to be. Ancient, patient, utterly indifferent. The Ardanu came through the rift the way a tide came through a gap in rocks, not with dramatic entry but with the gradual, inevitable filling of available space. It didn't have a shape that held still long enough to describe. It had geometries that existed and then were replaced by other geometries, surfaces that defined themselves according to what was adjacent to them, a form that was less a thing and more a process. "All weapons target the breach," Admiral Yularen commanded from the Invincible. "On the General's mark, hold," Anakin said. "Sir, hold." He was feeling through the Force, mapping the Ardanu's presence the way you mapped terrain before deciding how to move across it. If we fire at the breach while it's still forming, we hit the rift itself. We don't know what weapons discharge does to an open dimensional rift. We could widen it. So we wait, Rex said. We wait until it's fully through, Anakin said. And then we make it regret coming here. The Ardanu finished its transit. The rift sealed behind it, clean, complete, the dimensional wound closing as if it had never existed, which meant no retreat, no falling back through its own entrance, no option except forward or dissolution. That what faced them in open space was approximately 4 kilometers in its longest dimension and existed in a state of constant geometric reorganization, cycling through configurations that suggested it was assessing its environment, measuring contamination levels, calculating the scope of the reset function it had arrived to perform. Anakin reached out through the Force and touched the edge of it. What came back wasn't thought or intent or any of the things living beings projected into the Force. It was information, pure, uninterpreted data transmitted through the cosmic energy, the Ardanu's assessment of its own situation, and what Anakin perceived was so staggering in scale that he sat with it for 3 full seconds before he could translate it into something actionable. The Ardanu was simultaneously present in the normal space of this universe and partially existing in 17 other dimensional states. It was not a creature that had traveled from another universe. It was a feature of dimensional physics that existed at the intersection of universes, triggered into active state by contamination, manifesting wherever the barrier was weakest, functioning according to parameters that had been established before either universe it was currently touching had existed in their present forms, and it was faster than it looked. All ships, evasive, Anakin started, the Ardanu moved, not through space the way ships moved, through the geometry of space, shorting the distance between itself and its target by briefly existing in a dimensional state where that distance was different, then returning to normal space already there. The IKS Kang, a Klingon battlecruiser positioned at the inner perimeter of the defensive formation, simply ceased to exist in its current location and reappeared 100 meters off the Resolute starboard side, drifting, its systems in complete failure, its crew alive but unconscious. The ship had been moved, not destroyed. The Ardanu had relocated it out of a firing line it had calculated would be used against it. It's protecting itself from our weapons by moving our ships, Rex said. And it's doing it without destroying the crews, Marin said. It doesn't destroy what it doesn't need to destroy. It neutralizes, relocates, removes from engagement. Can it do that to all 400 ships? Anakin asked. Eventually, Marin said, it'll take time. Doing it individually expends energy it would rather direct at the reset function, which means we have a window where it's managing our resistance rather than executing its primary purpose. She paused. But General, it's going to start executing its primary purpose the moment it calculates that resistance management is costing more than just proceeding. Then we make resistance management cost more than it calculated, Anakin said. He activated the fleet-wide channel. All ships attack pattern Auric. Every weapon, simultaneous fire on my mark. Through the Force, he felt the Allied fleet's readiness. Federation precision, Klingon aggression, Romulan cunning, Republic firepower. 200 ships holding their collective breath. Mark. The volley that struck the Ardanu was the most concentrated weapons discharge in Alpha Quadrant history. The 200 ships firing simultaneously, targeting a single entity. Every weapon type from photon torpedoes to Romulan plasma to Klingon disruptors to Republic turbo lasers, converging on geometric configurations that should have had no capacity to absorb that much energy. The Ardanu reorganized, shifting geometries to redistribute the incoming energy across multiple dimensional states, absorbing what it could and deflecting what it couldn't directly into the space around it, which meant 3 Federation ships at the edge of the formation were struck by redirected energy and suffered catastrophic shield failures. But some of the fire got through. The Ardanu contracted. A significant portion of its outer geometric structure collapsed inward, reorganized, rebuilt. But the rebuilding took 6 seconds. And during those 6 seconds, the Force showed Anakin something critical. The Ardanu's dimensional anchoring was concentrated in specific geometric nodes, points where multiple configurations intersected, where the mechanism that allowed it to exist simultaneously across 17 dimensional states was focused into something small enough to target. The nodes weren't visible to conventional sensors. They were visible to the Force. "Ahsoka, Plo Koon," Anakin said, "are you seeing what I'm seeing?" The intersections, Ahsoka confirmed immediately. 7 of them, approximately 300 meters inward from the outer surface. They look like... She paused, searching for language. "They look like the places where it's most itself." "Those are what we target," Anakin said. "Everything else is peripheral. Damage the nodes and we don't redirect its energy. We disrupt the dimensional anchoring that lets it exist here." He was already moving toward the hangar. "Rex, you have the Resolute. Admiral Yularen, coordinate the fleet. Keep its attention distributed. Don't let it focus on one ship long enough to perform the reset function." He paused. "Marin, is there a threshold? A damage level at which the Ardanu can't sustain its presence in normal space?" Marin was running calculations with an intensity that suggested she was discovering the answer as she asked the question. "Theoretically, if you can destabilize 3 or more of the 7 nodes simultaneously, the dimensional anchoring becomes geometrically incoherent. It would have to retreat back through dimensional space to rebuild coherence." She looked up. "But General, if it retreats, it doesn't stop. It rebuilds and tries again, possibly through a different breach point, possibly stronger." "Can it be permanently stopped?" Ahsoka asked. "I don't know," Marin admitted. "The Sith texts Yoda referenced. They described encountering it. They didn't describe defeating it. They described surviving it." She paused. "Which might be the same thing as pushing it back far enough that it deprioritizes this location." "It responds to contamination," Anakin said, reaching the hangar and his waiting interceptor. "The contamination is the 501st. If the 501st were no longer in this universe, the contamination level drops below the activation threshold," Marin said. "Yes, that's always been the solution. That's why I tried to get you destroyed before it arrived." She paused. "But there's a problem with that solution now." "The resonance damage is already done," Plo Koon said. 9 months of dimensional research, micro rifts, force energy in a universe not designed for it. The contamination isn't just us anymore. It's the dimensional signature we've left in this quadrant's fabric. He paused. Our absence would reduce the contamination level, but it would not eliminate it. Not anymore. The implication settled over the bridge. So even if we go home, Rex said slowly. The Ardanu has already targeted this quadrant, Marin said. Going home removes the 500 first from the contamination equation, but it doesn't remove the resonance damage. The Ardanu would continue its reset function whether you're here or not. She paused. I was wrong about everything except the threat. You were never the solution. You were always just the cause. We're still the cause, Anakin said from the hangar, his interceptor's engines warming, which means we're still responsible for fixing it. He sealed his cockpit. Marin, what permanently reduces contamination below activation threshold? She ran 3 calculations in rapid succession. Dimensional resonance stabilization, she said. The same technology we were developing to create the return rift. If you run it in reverse, if you use it to reinforce the dimensional barrier rather than breach it, you could repair the resonance damage, seal the contamination into a pattern that doesn't trigger the Ardanu's reset function. She paused. But General, to stabilize resonance damage across this entire quadrant would require an energy output. How much? Anakin said. More than the Resolute's entire power plant, she said. More than every ship in this fleet combined, probably. We'd need a source of energy that could sustain focused dimensional resonance output for approximately, she ran the calculation, 40 continuous minutes. Silence. Then Ahsoka said, the Ardanu. Everyone stopped. It's a dimensional mechanism, Ahsoka continued, her voice carrying the quality it had when she was pursuing an idea through territory she hadn't fully mapped yet. It exists across 17 dimensional states simultaneously. The energy it operates on. It's dimensional resonance energy, concentrated, focused, ancient. She paused. If we could redirect its own energy output, use the Ardanu's resonance to power the stabilization rather than trying to generate the power ourselves, we'd be trying to turn an immune response into a surgical repair tool, Marin said slowly. We'd be trying to give it something more useful to do than reset the quadrant, Ahsoka replied. Silence. Anakin held still in his cockpit for exactly 4 seconds. The Force whispered something, not a plan, not a guarantee, but the particular quality of resonance that accompanied ideas that were simultaneously insane and correct. Can it be done? He said. I have no idea, Marin said. That's not a no, Anakin said. That's very much not a no, Marin admitted. But General, to redirect the Ardanu's energy output, someone would have to interface with it directly, not through technology. The dimensional resonance stabilization would have to be channeled through something it recognizes as... She stopped. As what? Rex said. The Force, Marin said quietly. The Force exists across dimensional states. It's the only energy form present in both universes simultaneously. The only medium the Ardanu would register as compatible with its own operational frequency. She looked at where Anakin's interceptor was staged in the hangar. General, what I'm describing would require a Force user to place themselves at the intersection of the Ardanu's dimensional anchoring nodes, to act as a conduit between the Ardanu's energy and the stabilization field we'd need to generate. To hold that conduit open for 40 minutes while the Ardanu is actively trying to perform its reset function. 40 minutes as a conduit for dimensional energy that had moved a Klingon battlecruiser without damaging it from inside it. Could two Jedi share the load? Ahsoka said, already knowing the answer. Theoretically, Marin said, if their force connection was strong enough, if they could maintain synchronization while managing both the conduit and the geometric pressure of 17 simultaneous dimensional states. She paused. I'm describing something that's never been done. We've done a lot of things that had never been done, Anakin said. He looked across the hangar at Ahsoka, who was standing at the door of a second interceptor she'd clearly been planning to take anyway. Snips. Don't tell me not to, she said. No, I was going to ask if you're ready, he said. She looked at him steadily. I've been ready for this since Coruscant. Outside, the Ardanu moved again. Another ship relocated, another Federation cruiser shifted harmlessly aside as the dimensional mechanism continued its patient geometric assessment of what it had arrived to reset. 200 ships holding a line, 7-dimensional anchoring nodes inside something 4 kilometers across. 40 minutes of impossible physics standing between the Alpha Quadrant and an ancient immune response that had been triggered by the presence of 10,000 people who just wanted to go home. Rex, Anakin said, Sir, if this works, he paused, and when I say if, I mean when, make sure Marin's data gets to the Council, all of it. The Ardanu, the resonance damage, the stabilization method. They need to know what happens when Sith dimensional research isn't stopped early. And if it doesn't work, Rex said. Anakin looked at him through the cockpit of an interceptor that was about to fly into the geometric heart of something older than civilization. Then tell everyone the 501st did it anyway, he said, because we always do. He launched. Ahsoka launched 6 seconds behind him. 2 interceptors crossed the 700,000 kilometers toward the Ardanu in 90 seconds, running dark, no weapon signatures, no active emissions, threading through the geometric reorganization of something that was simultaneously everywhere and precisely located depending on which dimensional state you were reading it from. The Force was screaming and singing at the same time, and Anakin flew toward the center of it like he'd been doing this his entire life, because in a way, he had. The geometry inside the Ardanu was wrong in ways that had nothing to do with architecture. Space didn't curve here, it disagreed. Directions argued with each other. Up existed in 3 simultaneous locations, and forward kept arriving back at itself from angles that shouldn't share coordinates. Anakin's instruments went dark within 30 seconds of crossing the outer threshold, every sensor giving readings that contradicted every other sensor until the system simply stopped trying. He flew on Force alone. Still with me? He said over the close-range communicator they'd established before crossing the threshold, a direct line between the 2 interceptors, sealed to outside interference. Still with you, Ahsoka said. She sounded exactly like herself. He'd half expected the geometry to change that somehow. Master, the nodes. I can feel them. Where? Everywhere, she said. And also, a pause, deeper, inward, like they exist at the same point from 7 different directions. That matched what the Force was showing him. 7 anchoring nodes occupying the same geometric space from 7 different dimensional states. Not 7 separate locations, but 7 expressions of one location that existed simultaneously across dimensional layers. To reach them, you didn't navigate toward them. You navigated toward the state of being at them. Don't think about the geometry, Anakin said. Think about what you're trying to do. Let the Force handle the navigation. You say that like it's simple. It's not simple, he said. I said let the Force handle it. Not that you'd enjoy the experience. Something moved in the space around them. Not the Ardanu itself, but a consequence of the Ardanu. Dimensional pressure shifting as the mechanism registered their presence inside its structure. Not aggressive. More like the way a body registered something foreign. Awareness without yet deciding what response was appropriate. It knows we're here, Ahsoka said. It's been aware of the Force since we arrived in this quadrant, Anakin said. We're not foreign to it the way conventional matter is. He searched for language. Adjacent. The Force exists in dimensional space the same way it does. It recognizes the resonance. Does that help us or hurt us? I'm about to find out. He reached out through the Force with deliberate intent. Not the combat awareness he used in battle. Not the environmental sensing he used for navigation, but the deeper connection that Jedi training described as attunement. The state of being present to something rather than analyzing it. The thing that happened when you stopped trying to understand the Force and started trusting it. Ahsoka, don't fight the geometry. Let it show you where it wants to be. The nodes will find you if you stop trying to find them. A pause. That is profoundly unhelpful tactical advice, she said. It's not tactical advice, he said. It's Jedi advice. When did those become different things? 9 months ago, he said. More or less. He stopped flying, held the interceptor completely still, in a space where stillness didn't behave predictably, and breathed, and opened himself to the Force in the way that Master Qui-Gon had tried to teach him 20 years ago on a ship very different from this one. The node came to him. Not physically, it didn't move, but his perception of where it was resolved like the moment when a magic eye pattern suddenly becomes visible. The depth was there all along, and the eye just needed to stop looking for it to see it. He was at the node. He had been at the node. The node was not a place he was traveling to. It was a state he was always already in, and the Force had simply been waiting for him to stop searching so he could recognize his own location. I have it, he said. Ahsoka stopped. Oh, that's strange. I have it too. Same one. No, she said. Different one. Master, they're all different ones. They're all the same one. How are they? Don't try to understand it, he said. Just hold it. He held the node. Through the Force, he felt the Ardanu notice, not with surprise. Surprise required expectations, and the Ardanu did not have expectations in the way conscious beings did, but with something that functioned like recalibration, a mechanism encountering a variable it had not incorporated into its operational model. 2 Force users at dimensional anchor points, not attacking them, not fleeing from them, simply present at them with the kind of focused, intentional awareness that the Ardanu's own dimensional resonance recognized as compatible with its frequency. Marin, Anakin said into the fleet channel. Static. The Ardanu's geometry distorted communication frequencies. He pushed through the force, not transmitted a message but impressed a direction. The same way Jedi training allowed for basic force-based communication across distance, not words, intent, ready, begin. Outside, 200 kilometers away in normal space, Marin Vael understood. On the Resolute's bridge, Marin's hands were already moving. Dimensional stabilization field initiating, she said. Drawing on all available power, Resolute, Invincible, and the 6 ships Yularen repositioned as power sources. She looked at the energy readings. It's not enough. We're at 31% of required output. Federation ships are patching in, Kix reported. Janeway rerouted main power from the 3rd Fleet's 14 vessels. We're at 47%. Still not enough, Marin said. We need the Klingon battle cruisers. Rex was already transmitting. General Martok, we need everything you have. Every ship. Full power transfer to the stabilization field. Martok's response came without hesitation. Done. What are you building? Something that's never been built before, Rex said. Then it is a good day, Martok replied. Power readings climbed. 58%, 63, 70. Romulan warbirds are holding back, Kix said. Neral, Rex said. Neral's face appeared on screen. Commander Rex, you're asking me to transfer primary power from 12 warbirds during active engagement with a dimensional entity. You understand this leaves my ships essentially defenseless. I understand, Rex said. The question is whether you trust us enough to do it anyway. Neral looked at him with those cold eyes for exactly 3 seconds. The Tal Shiar will note this for future reference, he said. Transfer authorized, 84%. It's still not enough, Marin said. Rex looked at the power readings, looked at the fleet status display, looked at every ship that had transferred everything it could and was still leaving them 16% short of the threshold needed to drive the stabilization field for 40 minutes. The Resolute's backup reactors, he said. Those are emergency power, Kix said. If we transfer those, we're sitting dark, Rex said. I know. He looked at the Ardanu, visible through the viewport as a region of geometric impossibility in open space, with 2 tiny interceptors somewhere inside it. We're already committed. Do it. Kix transferred the backup reactors, 91%. Still need 9%, Marin said. The research station power cells, Burnham said from secondary tactical. She was already accessing the inventory. The ones we've been stockpiling for the dimensional portal. We never used them. They're stored in Cargo Bay 3. If we rig a direct connection to the stabilization field. How long? Rex asked. 4 minutes. Do it. Burnham ran. Inside the Ardanu, the 4-minute wait felt different. Anakin was aware of 2 things simultaneously. His own presence at the node, which the Force maintained with the steady persistence of something that had found its natural position, and the Ardanu's growing recalibration, which was becoming something more active than passive assessment. It hadn't started its reset function yet, but it was close. The dimensional pressure was increasing, a sensation like being at great depth, like reality itself, pressing inward from 17 directions at once. It's deciding, Ahsoka said. I know. How long can you hold this? As long as necessary, Anakin said. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. He felt her through their training bond, steady, focused, holding her node with the same quality of presence, he was trying to maintain at his own. 8 years of shared Jedi training expressing itself in the one situation neither of them had ever trained for. Ahsoka, whatever happens here, whatever has happened, you were the best decision I ever made as a teacher. A pause. You were a terrible teacher, she said. I know. You never followed the lesson plan. The lesson plan was boring. You made me meditate in a combat zone. You learned faster that way. I learned because I was afraid you'd get us both killed if I didn't figure it out quickly, she said. Master, when this is over, when we're through this and the 501st is safe and the quadrant is intact, I want to talk about what happens next, what the 501st actually wants. Not just survival, not just getting home, what we're actually fighting for. When this is over, Anakin said, promise me. He felt the dimensional pressure spike, the Ardanu making a decision, beginning to execute, the reset function activating with the slow inevitability of a tidal force. I promise, he said, and the Ardanu began its reset. The energy that hit the nodes from 17-dimensional directions simultaneously was not violent. It was systematic, methodical, the way a surgeon operated rather than the way a weapon fired. It was trying to reorganize the dimensional resonance at the anchor points, to push the contaminating elements back to their origin state, to restore the barrier, to execute the function it had arrived to perform. The Force screamed. Anakin held. He didn't fight the energy. He did what he'd told Ahsoka. Let the Force handle it. Let the dimensional resonance flow through him rather than trying to redirect it with his own will. Became a conduit rather than a resistance point. Felt the difference between those two approaches, the way you felt the difference between standing against a current and being part of it. The Ardanu felt it too. Its recalibration shifted again, something encountering the Force as compatible resonance rather than foreign contamination, something that had never before been interfaced with in this way, encountering a variable that its operational model genuinely had not anticipated. Now, Anakin thought not a word, an intent. The direction sent through the Force toward Marin 200 kilometers away in normal space. 98%, Marin said. Burnham had made it back from cargo bay 3 minutes 40 seconds. Stabilization field at operational threshold. General Skywalker is... She paused, reading the dimensional resonance data that was the only information coming from inside the Ardanu. He's at the node. Both of them are. They're... She stopped. What? Rex said. They're not redirecting the Ardanu's energy, she said slowly. They're not forcing it. They're... She looked at the data with the expression of someone watching a theoretical model come true in real time. They're offering it somewhere else to go. They're making the stabilization field look like the reset function from the inside. Making the Ardanu's own energy flow toward dimensional repair rather than reset. She shook her head slightly. I didn't think that was possible. Is it working? Rex said. Marin watched the readings for 8 seconds. Yes, she said. The stabilization field erupted across the Alpha Quadrant's dimensional fabric with the energy of an ancient mechanism that had found its function repurposed, not suppressed, not defeated, not redirected by force, invited toward something more useful than destruction, channeled through 2 Jedi who were holding themselves at the intersection of 17-dimensional states and trusting the Force to keep them together through 40 minutes of physics that had no name yet. The resonance damage began to seal, not quickly, not completely, but the fracture lines in dimensional space that 9 months of Republic presence had created began to close, guided by energy that operated at the fundamental frequency of the barrier itself. On the Resolute's bridge, every power system went dark. The ship drifted, and Rex stood in the silence with 200 allied vessels around him, all of them running on reserve power, all of them waiting. "How long?" he asked. 37 minutes, Marin said. Rex sat down in the command chair, waited. 14 minutes in, the Ardanu pushed back, not because the process wasn't working. It was working. The dimensional resonance data Marin was tracking showed consistent repair across the affected region. But working required holding the conduit open. And holding the conduit open required the Ardanu's energy to remain directed through the 2 Jedi at its nodes. And the Ardanu's operational parameters weren't designed for redirection. They were designed for reset. And somewhere in the ancient mechanism's function, something recognized that the outcome being produced wasn't the outcome it had been triggered to produce. The pressure at the nodes increased. Anakin felt Ahsoka through their training bond, still present, still holding, but the quality had changed. The Force was working harder. The conduit was costing more. "Still with me?" he said. "Define with you," she said. Her voice was controlled, but carrying something at the edges. "Are you intact?" "Mostly." "Ahsoka." "I'm intact," she said. "Keep going." He kept going. 18 minutes, 22. The geometry inside the Ardanu was changing, the cycling reorganization slowing, the configurations taking longer to replace each other, the mechanism doing something Anakin could only describe through the Force as reorientation. It was processing an outcome that contradicted its function, encountering the result of its own energy producing dimensional stabilization rather than reset. And in the gap between its designed function and the actual result being produced, something that wasn't thought and wasn't will, but was the closest thing an ancient impersonal mechanism had to either. It paused. Not stopped. Paused. In the pause, Anakin felt something that the Force translated as recognition. The Ardanu registering that the dimensional contamination was being repaired, that the threshold which had triggered its activation was receding, that the function it had arrived to perform was being performed, not by the mechanism, but through it, and the outcome was the same. The barrier was being restored. The contamination was being sealed. The reset was happening, just not the way the Ardanu had planned. For 6 seconds, nothing increased its pressure on the nodes. Then, with the ponderous inevitability of a tide turning, the Ardanu redirected, not toward the interceptors, not toward the Jedi at the nodes, toward the dimensional barrier itself, its full energy output channeled into the stabilization field that Marin was sustaining from the Resolute, pouring ancient dimensional resonance into the repair work with a force that made every power reading outside shoot off the scale. Readings are... Marin stopped. The Ardanu is contributing, directly. The energy output just increased by... She looked at the numbers. 400%. Rex sat forward. Is that good? The stabilization work that was going to take 40 minutes, Marin said, is going to take 9. 29 minutes after Anakin and Ahsoka had entered the Ardanu, it was done. The dimensional barrier sealed. The resonance damage repaired, not perfectly, not permanently, but below the activation threshold, that had triggered the Ardanu's response. The contamination sealed into a pattern that the ancient mechanism registered as managed rather than active. The function that had brought it here executed through a method that had no precedent in either universe, and complete. The Ardanu went still. Its geometric reorganization slowed. The configuration simplified. The 17-dimensional states it had been occupying simultaneously began to collapse, not violently, not with the energy of a failing system, but with the quiet inevitability of something that had finished what it came to do and was returning to the state of not being needed. It contracted 2 kilometers, 1/2, a point of absolute darkness in space, smaller than a shuttlecraft, then nothing. The dimensional resonance monitors read clean, the barrier read stable, and 2 interceptors drifted in normal space where the Ardanu had been, surrounded by the debris of its brief geometric presence, their systems rebooting as the physics around them returned to behavior that instruments were designed to measure. "Snips," Anakin said. A pause. "Still here," she said. Her voice was exhausted in the bone-deep way that came from 40 minutes of holding something that weighed more than the body was designed to carry. "You? Still here," he confirmed. Another pause. "You owe me a conversation," she said. "I remember," he said. "Good." A longer pause. "Master that thing at the end, when it stopped fighting and just contributed. Did you feel that?" "Yes," he said. "What was it?" He thought about it for a moment, about what the Force had translated in those final minutes, about the quality of recognition that an ancient impersonal mechanism had expressed when it registered that its function was being performed through means it hadn't anticipated. "I think," he said carefully, "that it wasn't indifferent. We just didn't have the right frame of reference to tell the difference between indifference and patience." He paused. "It was waiting for someone to do what needed doing. It just assumed it would have to do it itself." Ahsoka was quiet for a moment. "That's either very profound or very strange," she said. "In my experience, those are the same thing," Anakin said. He turned his interceptor toward the Resolute and began the 200-kilometer flight, back to a ship that was drifting dark in open space, surrounded by 200 Allied vessels that had transferred every watt of power they had to save a quadrant they'd been ready to destroy, the 501st, to protect 3 days ago. The Force was quiet. Not the muted quiet of a universe that wasn't designed for it. The clean quiet of something that had been wrong for a long time and had just been imperfectly and expensively and against considerable odds set right. The Resolute got power back in stages. First, the emergency lighting, amber strips along corridor floors, casting everything in the color of a dying fire. Then life support, then gravity plating, then communications. The main power plant came back online 47 minutes after Marin had transferred the last reserves to the stabilization field, coughing back to life with the particular reluctance of a system that had been pushed past design tolerances and was registering its objection through every alert tone it possessed. Rex stood in the center of the bridge watching the boards come back green one by one and allowed himself exactly 30 seconds of something that wasn't quite relief but was in the same neighborhood. Then he started making a list of everything that still needed handling. It was a long list. "Casualty report," he said. "Fleet-wide," Kix replied, pulling data as systems restored. We're looking at 43 vessels with significant damage. 11 ships lost main propulsion. 3 Federation vessels have hull breaches requiring immediate repair. No confirmed deaths from direct Ardanu contact. It relocated ships rather than destroying them, but we have 214 crew members with neurological effects consistent with dimensional exposure. Medical teams are assessing. He paused. Klingon forces report 0 casualties and consider this a victory of appropriate glory. Of course they do, Rex said. The IKS Kang that got relocated. The crew woke up confused but intact. They're requesting someone explain what happened to their navigation logs. Tell them we'll brief everyone together, Rex said. And get me a channel to Janeway, Martok, and Neral. Give them 20 minutes to restore power to their flagships. Then I want all 3 on screen simultaneously. Sir, Burnham said from Secondary Tactical, General Skywalker's interceptor just docked. Rex nodded. Tell him I have the list. He'll know what that means. He always knows what that means. Anakin came onto the bridge looking like someone who had spent 40 minutes as a conduit for dimensional energy and was pretending that it hadn't cost as much as it had. Rex had seen that expression across 3 years of the Clone Wars and 9 months of dimensional exile, the particular configuration of Anakin Skywalker's face when he was managing physical cost through force of will and expecting nobody to notice. Everybody always noticed. Ahsoka? Rex asked. Medical bay, Anakin said. She's fine. She's arguing with the medical droids about whether she needs rest, which means she's fine. He looked at the restored boards. Casualty report. Rex gave it to him. Anakin listened without interrupting, which was how Rex knew he was tired. Normally he asked questions throughout. Today he just absorbed it and nodded at the end. The Ardanu? He said. Gone, Marin said from her station. She'd barely moved in the 47 minutes since the stabilization field had gone dark. She looked like someone who had been sitting with the aftermath of 18 months of decisions and was processing it quietly rather than performatively. Dimensional resonance reads stable. Barrier integrity is at 93% of pre-contamination baseline. It'll degrade slightly over the next few months as residual resonance settles, but it won't drop below activation threshold. She paused. We're safe. Both universes. For now, Anakin said. For now, she confirmed. The barrier is repaired. The contamination is sealed. But the fundamental physics haven't changed. Dimensional travel is still possible. Dimensional breaches can still occur, and if someone in either universe pursues aggressive dimensional research without understanding the resonance implications, then we're back here, Anakin said. Eventually, she said, yes. He nodded slowly. Then we make sure that doesn't happen. He looked at her steadily. Which is a conversation we're going to have. You, me, the Council, and whoever in Republic intelligence has been suppressing dimensional threat research for the past 18 months. But that conversation can wait 20 minutes. He turned to Rex. The list. Rex handed him a data chip. Anakin read it. His expression moved through several phases. Marinvile needs to be handed to Janeway. Yes, Rex said. Sola's situation is more complicated. Yes, Rex said. The Korath assassination is technically still unsolved in terms of formal attribution. Yes, Rex said. And we still need to explain to 400 ships why their power plants are empty. He looked up from the chip. Anything else? General Cole is dead, Rex said quietly. The Bordas didn't survive the Battle of Tezra Expanse. I thought you should hear it separately from the casualty report. Anakin was still for a moment. He died well, Anakin said. He died exactly the way he wanted to, Rex agreed. His house has already sent a transmission. They're requesting formal acknowledgement of his death in battle alongside Republic forces. They want it in the historical record. They'll have it, Anakin said. He set the data chip down. Get me Janeway. The three-way call that followed was unlike any of the previous three-way calls. Not adversarial, not careful, not the diplomatic maneuvering of parties managing their positions. Just tired people who had collectively survived something that should have been unsurvivable and were now working through what that meant. Commander Tano is formally released from all charges, Janeway said. Her voice had the quality of someone who had already made this decision and was now executing it rather than deliberating. The crystal resonance analysis he combined with evidence that the assassination was orchestrated by an outside party with forged credentials. The case is closed. Korath's murder will be formally attributed to an agent operating under false Republic identity who has since been identified as Marin Vael. Marin Vael cooperated fully with the dimensional threat assessment, Anakin said. Her methods were wrong. Her intelligence was correct. I'm asking for that to be factored into whatever process you put her through. Janeway looked at him for a moment. I'll note it. I'm not promising outcomes. That's all I'm asking, Anakin said. Martok, whose flagship had been one of the 11 vessels to lose main propulsion when its entire power plant was drained into the stabilization field, spoke with the particular bluntness of a Klingon who had decided that the current situation called for clarity rather than ceremony. The Khitomer Accords. They were suspended pending investigation into Korath's death. The investigation is concluded. The Accords are restored. He paused. But they require a new architect. Korath's work died with him. Someone needs to rebuild what he spent 40 years constructing. That's a conversation for another day, Janeway said. That conversation needs to happen soon, Martok replied, because whatever brought the Ardanu here has also demonstrated that the major powers of this quadrant are capable of coordinated action when sufficiently motivated. That capability should not be wasted. Neral, who had said nothing for the first 5 minutes of the call, spoke carefully. The Tal Shiar has completed its analysis of the dimensional resonance data. The conclusion is consistent with what Marin Vael presented. The barrier is stable, the contamination is sealed, and the immediate threat has been resolved. He paused. However, the method by which it was resolved has created a precedent that the Star Empire finds worth noting. 2 Force users interfaced directly with an extra-dimensional mechanism and redirected its function. The implications of that capability are significant. Yes, Anakin said. The Star Empire will want to discuss those implications at the appropriate time. Yes, Anakin said. So will I. He met Neral's eyes through the screen. But right now, I'm interested in something more immediate. The 501st has been in this quadrant for 9 months. We've started a war, ended a war, fought the Borg, fought the Ardanu, and managed to alienate every major power at least once, while also working alongside all of them when it mattered. We're running out of ways to introduce catastrophic dimensional variables into your quadrant's politics. He paused. I want to discuss what a permanent 501st presence in this quadrant looks like. Not as contractors, not as dimensional refugees, as something with defined status and defined responsibilities. Janeway looked at him for a moment. You're not going home? We can go home, Anakin said. The dimensional technology exists. The Council has the data. We could build a portal within months. He paused. But the barrier is fragile. Every deliberate rift we open accelerates the resonance decay. And the Republic universe has problems that the 501st can't solve by arriving. We checked. And apparently we cause additional problems when we're there too. He glanced at Rex. The 501st voted to come home 8 months ago. I think it's time to vote again, with better information. You'd stay, Janeway said. Some of us might, Anakin said. Some might go home. I'm not going to make that decision for 10,000 people who've been following my judgment calls across 2 universes for the better part of a year. But I want the option of staying to be a real option, with recognized status, with defined relationships to the powers in this quadrant. He looked at all 3 of them. The 501st is the only military force in this quadrant that has direct experience with what's on the other side of the dimensional barrier. That knowledge has value. I'd like to negotiate what that value is worth before someone decides to extract it less formally. Neral almost smiled. Martok said, a reasonable position. Presented reasonably, I am suspicious. Get used to it, Rex said from behind Anakin. He does that occasionally. The vote took 12 hours to organize and 4 hours to count. In the intervening time, Marin Vael was transferred to Federation custody, not with the controlled handoff of a prisoner exchange, but with the complicated silence of people who weren't sure what category she belonged in. She walked off the Resolute with the data chip containing her full 18-month dimensional threat assessment and a formal written acknowledgement from Anakin Skywalker that her intelligence had been correct even when her methods had been catastrophically wrong. She looked back once before the airlock sealed. Mao Anakin was standing at the viewport. They looked at each other for a moment, then the airlock sealed, and the Federation custody transport carried her away to whatever the process of accountability looked like for someone who had committed terrible acts in service of preventing something worse. Sola remained aboard. Her situation was, as Rex had noted, more complicated. She had been placed by parties unknown, redirected by Marin, and had ultimately made the choice to be found, which suggested an ethical line she'd drawn somewhere along the way. Her case would take time to untangle. She seemed prepared to wait. The 2 devices, the one Rex had found and the one Burnham had been carrying for 9 months, went to the research team for construction analysis. The results confirmed what they'd suspected. Both had been built by the same person, a Marin, operating alone, without the outside handler that Sola had initially implied. The story was simpler and more complicated than it had appeared from inside it. It usually was. The vote results came in at 0630 ship time. Rex read them to Anakin privately first, the same way he'd read everything important across 3 years of war and 9 months of exile, standing in the captain's observation alcove with 2 cups of something hot, and the particular quality of silence that existed between soldiers who had been through enough together that most communication happened in the space between words. Return to Republic Universe, 4,891 votes. 49.7% remain in Alpha Quadrant. 4,101 votes. 41.6%. Undecided/conditional. 855 votes. 8.7%. Anakin looked at the numbers for a long time. "It's almost even," he said. "Almost," Rex confirmed. "That's not a mandate in either direction." "No," Rex said, "it's not." Anakin held his cup and looked at the stars. Nearly half wanted to go home. He understood that. The Republic was home, broken and corrupt, and currently featuring an escaped Sith Lord, but home. The Clone Wars were still being fought. People they knew were still dying in a conflict that the 501st's return might help end or might make worse depending on what Palpatine did with the knowledge that dimensional travel was possible. And nearly half wanted to stay. He understood that too. 9 months had built something here. Relationships with 3 civilizations. Knowledge that existed nowhere else. The particular investment in a place that came from having bled for it and been changed by it. And the barrier was fragile. Every deliberate rift was a risk. The going home might be the last rift they ever opened. "What do you want?" Rex asked. It was a question Rex had never asked in 3 years of the Clone Wars. Anakin realized that it had taken exile in a different universe for his commander to consider it a fair question to raise. "I want the war to end," Anakin said. "I want the clones to have the life they deserve after it ends. I want Ahsoka to be able to choose what she does next, without it being determined by whatever crisis arrives first. I want," he paused, "I want what everyone wants, the things that are hardest to get." "That's not what I asked," Rex said. Anakin looked at him. "I know," he said. A pause. "I want to stay," Anakin said quietly. "Not forever, but I want to finish what we started here. And I want the people who want to go home safely. And I want to believe that both things are possible at the same time." He paused. "I want to stop being afraid that wanting things is the first step toward losing them." Rex said nothing for a moment. "That sounds like something you should talk to Ahsoka about," he said. "She made me promise," Anakin said. "Then keep it," Rex said. "The conversation, not a debrief, not a tactical assessment, an actual conversation about what comes next for the people who built something in 9 months that nobody expected them to build." He paused. "Sir, the 501st didn't just survive in this universe. We changed it, and it changed us. That means something. Whatever the vote says, whatever the council says, whatever Palpatine is planning, that means something." Anakin looked at the numbers again. 4,000 people wanted to stay. The 5,000 wanted to go home. 855 people weren't sure yet. "We split the fleet," Anakin decided. "People who want to go home, go home. We build one final portal, carefully, with every resonance protection Marin's data can provide. They go through, the portal closes." He paused. "People who want to stay, stay, with defined status, defined relationships, defined responsibilities to this quadrant, not contractors, not refugees." He looked at the stars. "Something new. That doesn't have a name yet." Rex nodded slowly. "And you?" Anakin picked up his cup, drank, thought about the Republic with its corruption and its war and its Sith Lord at the shadows and its 9 months of battles that had continued without him. He thought about this quadrant with its complicated politics and its dimensional physics and its 4 civilizations that had learned slowly, painfully, through mutual catastrophe. That cooperation was possible even between people who had very good reasons not to trust each other. Thought about a promise he'd made to Ahsoka 30 minutes before redirecting an ancient dimensional mechanism through the Force. "Ask me again in a week," he said. Rex almost smiled. "The Resolute needs 3 weeks of repair minimum," he said. "You have time." Ahsoka was sitting up in the medical bay when Anakin arrived, arguing with the medical droid in the precise tone of someone who had already won the argument on every logical ground and was now simply waiting for the droid's programming to catch up. "You need rest," the droid said. "I've rested for 40 minutes, Ahsoka said. "I'm rested. My assessment indicates your assessment is noted and respectfully rejected." She looked up when Anakin came in. "Tell it I'm fine." "She's fine," Anakin said. "General Skywalker, I must advise." "She's fine," he said again. The droid processed this for 3 seconds, registered the command authority ranking, and moved away with the particular dignity of a medical droid that has been overruled and is logging its objection for the record. Ahsoka swung her legs off the bed, looked at him. "You promised me a conversation," she said. "I know," he said. He pulled up the chair that patients' visitors used, low, uncomfortable, clearly designed to discourage extended stays, and sat in it. Outside the medical bay's small viewport, the Alpha Quadrant's stars burned with the same indifferent beauty they always had. "The vote was almost even," he said. "I heard," she said. "I voted undecided." "I know," he said. "That's actually what I wanted to talk about." She looked at him. "You're going to tell me I should go home," she said. "I'm going to tell you that you should choose," he said. "Without calculating what I'm going to choose, without trying to figure out what the order would sanction or what the council would recommend or what makes strategic sense for the 501st. He paused. "What does Ahsoka Tano want?" She was quiet for a moment. The question had weight, not because it was hard to answer. Anakin suspected she'd known the answer for months, but because being asked it directly by someone who meant it was different from knowing it privately. "Well, I want to stay for a while," she said. "I want to finish understanding what we started here. I want to talk to the Federation scientists about Force theory, and I want to understand how the Ardanu could be redirected, and I want to figure out what it means that the Force exists in a universe that wasn't built for it." She paused. "And then I want to go home, not because the Republic deserves my service or because the Jedi Order is right about everything, but because there are people there who are going to face things I understand better now than I did when I left. And understanding something is," she looked for the word, "a responsibility. When you know something, you have to decide what to do with knowing it." "That's very Jedi of you," Anakin said. "I had a very Jedi upbringing," she said. "Mostly bad. Occasionally brilliant." He almost smiled. "Master," she said, "what did it feel like when the Ardanu redirected, when it stopped fighting and just went with it?" Anakin thought about it. "Like forgiveness," he said. "Not for anything specific, just the structural feeling of it. Something old and implacable, deciding that the outcome was close enough to acceptable and releasing the tension it had been holding." He paused. "I've been holding tension like that for a long time, about a lot of things, and I thought maybe that's the lesson. Maybe that's what 9 months in a different universe has been building toward. Not the tactical innovations or the alliance structures or even the dimensional physics. Just learning what it feels like when something ancient and implacable decides the outcome is close enough to acceptable. Ahsoka looked at him for a long moment. "You're going to stay," she said. "For a while," he said, "and then we'll see." She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. Not agreement exactly, acceptance. The particular quality of trust that came from knowing someone well enough to know when their reasoning was sound, even when it was personal. Anakin stood up, looked out the viewport at the stars and the distant shapes of Allied ships running repair operations, their running lights creating moving constellations in the dark. Somewhere out there, 4,000 people were making peace with staying in a universe that had tried to destroy them and instead been changed by them. Somewhere else, 5,000 people were preparing to go home to a war that had continued without them, and that they still believed they could help end. And one Sith Lord was running in the shadows of a republic that now had a name for what it was dealing with, and a Jedi Council that had received data it could no longer bury, and a 501st Legion that had spent 9 months learning lessons that Palpatine hadn't factored into his calculations. Anakin thought about Palpatine, thought about the Clone Wars, thought about the Force which had been guiding him toward this moment, this particular configuration of understanding, for longer than he'd realized. He turned away from the viewport. "Get dressed," he said to Ahsoka. "We have 3 weeks before the Resolute is repaired. I promised Rex we'd use the time properly." He paused at the door. "There's going to be a memorial service for every person who died in the last 72 hours. Every ship, every crew, every name, and the 501st is going to be there for all of it, because that's what you do when people die protecting something you built." "And after the 3 weeks?" Ahsoka said. He looked back at her. "After 3 weeks," he said, "we figure out what comes next, together, like we always have." She held his gaze for a moment. "Worst teacher," she said. "Best partner." "I'll take it," he said. He walked out. The Resolute's corridors were coming back to life around him. Clone troopers moving with purpose, repair crews running cable. The ordinary, organized chaos of a ship that had been pushed past its limits and was being carefully rebuilt. The amber emergency lighting had given way to full illumination, and the familiar sounds of Republic military operations filled spaces that had been dark and silent 40 minutes ago. It didn't feel like home exactly, but it felt like something that was becoming its own thing, something that didn't have a name yet. That was, Anakin thought, usually how the best things started. 6 hours later, the memorial service was attended by representatives from every ship in every fleet that had fought alongside the 501st in the previous 72 hours. Klingon warriors stood alongside Federation officers, alongside Romulan commandos, alongside clone troopers in blue-striped armor. Names were read in 4 languages. Traditions were honored with the quiet respect of people acknowledging that grief had its own dialects but the same grammar. General Cole's name was read last in Klingon by Martok himself, he who had come aboard the Resolute in full warrior regalia and who stood with his hands behind his back and his jaw set in the expression of someone paying the kind of debt that couldn't be cleared but could be acknowledged. When it was done, nobody moved immediately. the particular silence of shared loss, something that required no translation. Rex stood beside Anakin, and for a moment neither of them spoke, and the Force was quiet, and the Alpha Quadrant stretched out in every direction with all its complicated politics and its fragile peace and its dimensional barrier sealed to 93%. "Sir," Rex said eventually quietly. "Rex." "For what it's worth," Rex said, "I think we did something here, not just survived. Something." Anakin looked at the stars. "I think so too," he said. Rex nodded once. They stood there a while longer. The memorial ended. The Resolute began its repairs, and in the spaces between universes, where the dimensional barrier ran clean and sealed, and the Ardanu rested in its dormant state, the Force moved in its patient way through both realities simultaneously, connecting everything that was to everything that had been, suggesting, not guaranteeing, never guaranteeing, but suggesting that the hardest things were often followed by the most necessary ones. The 501st Legion had started a war in the Alpha Quadrant. They'd also ended one. They'd been framed and exonerated, betrayed and redeemed, hunted by an ancient mechanism and understood by it. They'd discovered that the line between villain and hero was mostly a matter of information. Who had it when they got it, and what they chose to do once they understood the full shape of the problem they were trying to solve. And they'd learned, again, in the way you had to keep learning, because it kept being true in new ways, that the people who survive the impossible are the ones who refuse to calculate whether surviving is likely before deciding to attempt it. The 501st didn't survive because they were invincible. They survived because they were unconvinced that dying was inevitable. And in a universe that had tried very hard to convince them otherwise, that had been enough.